Anybody in the mountain times that get to hear?
Hello? Wow.
Okay, sorry.
Won't hold the mic so close. Thanks, everybody, for coming. Thank you, Justin. Well, it's 10 after 12, so we should probably start. I'm sure we'll have more people arrive. If anybody would like to fill out a speaker slip, they're at the, I don't know if you need to. And if you choose to, fine, and if not, we're just going to pass the mic around. Can I see how many of you, or if anyone came to the first meeting that we had? Okay, great. Thank you. Okay, and can I also see a show of hands? How many did lose their home? Okay.
So we don't lose ours.
Yeah, and the next one, exactly.
All right, a lot of you I know or have met. For those I haven't, I'm Karen Farrer, Mayor Pro Tem, elected November 6th, 2 days before the fire started, 3 days before it came through here, and Mikey Pearson can introduce himself.
Yep, same deal as Karen. We both had our own experiences, as many of you probably know, in the fire. And both of them important to us helping drive things forward. I stayed and fought the fire, and Karen did the smart thing and evacuated and dealt with that nightmare. So just as a quick catch-up, we have received a good amount of emails with people's concerns, their ideas, some great ideas. Some people are sending us absolutely phenomenal scientific data on fighting or surviving a fire. And I've changed my dialogue. Our houses did not burn down in a wildfire. They burned down in the urban interface on a fire. So the houses that I try to defend in my neighborhood, I think every single one burned down by embers, not one by flames. So
What does urban interface mean in layman's terms?
What it means is, I guess, just looking at photos. Someone sent us something really excellent the other day. In this photo you may have seen, it's of Paradise, and it's of this neighborhood from above, and they've all burned about 7 or 8 in this neighborhood. But the trees all around it are green and beautiful. So the trees did not burn down, and the flames did not come in there and burn down that neighborhood. It was embers from what was burning, I assume, below, that went into that neighborhood and ignited homes. There was no direct flame contact. So when I think back fighting the fires in my neighborhood, I remember now, we met the fires, it came down Trancas, it was scary, it was big, about 3 of us, 4 of us, and we fought it, and then a house burst into flames behind us, and just was ignited, and just on fire, no saving it within 10 minutes. And we're like, oh, what the heck? So, and then the rest of the day was spent going house to house, trying to prevent embers from igniting the home. The embers that went into the vents, which is probably 40 to 50% is my guess when I think back and look at my personal videos, nothing we could do. Done. Gone. An easy fix right there. There's new vents. The others were, the bougainvillea caught fire, something under the deck, some debris, leaves, caught the wood deck on fire. 2 old gas mains got hot from the plants nearby burning. They came apart, and we lost those homes. We could not save them. The homes did not catch fire except a gas main, which allowed me to know, the old gas main, my neighborhood's pretty old, that when we get an earthquake, there's gonna be homes in my neighborhood that just burst into flames. So part of our neighborhood's recovery is gonna be very much a program related to surviving the urban interface on a fire, how fire really takes your house down, which is embers, and your neighbor's house burning fire. So that aerial photo shows the homes that survived are all next to each other. So they didn't domino. And that was our theory fighting the fire in Malibu West. We did not want the top of the neighborhood to catch fire. So we met the fire where it came in. Problem was it went right by us on either side too, so we didn't really win that battle. But if the neighborhood at the top had caught, and of course the top home was under construction and all wood, so we put our resources on that and saved that whole top of the neighborhood. So we never got the domino effect from the top. We just then made it fall back, and of course we lost homes. So we're making progress. Karen and I have gone to a boatload of meetings, met with a ton of people.
Just like all of you.
Yes, but ours, you know, maybe because of where we're sitting on city council involved getting to talk with Chief Osby, talking with the sheriff, talking with the highway patrol. We'll be flying up to Sacramento soon. And then at the council's direction, we've hired this firm, which was an interesting experience. And they're gonna start soon, and they're gonna investigate the fire internally to see the city's response. And that's great. But mainly, and even more important, is how we can be better prepared as a city going forward. So I think that'll actually be money well spent, which I didn't quite see at the time. We were kind of given this task and we had to figure it out, and had the interesting experience to talking to incredible companies around the country that do this, and they've done 9/11, did Parkland shooting. This is what they do. They go into disasters and afterwards or beforehand, which would have been nice, but help communities rebuild, or help organizations and agencies rebuild and go forward.
So, okay, we don't want to just talk all day. We want to listen to you. I just want to point out in the audience, we've got an architect, Lester Tobias. We've got a retired firefighter, Tony Schaefer. We've got Scott Dietrich here, who's on our Public Works Commission. Let's see. Help me out. We've got T-Sep here from Topanga.
Well, no, I'm not T-Sep. Sorry.
You're
I'm actually officially representing the Ember people.
Ember people.
Oh, wow.
It's Topanga Canyon Fire Safe Council that you guys met with, and
Right.
grab one on your way
Thank
out.
you.
I've just kind of called that whole thing T-Sep, but I guess
No.
it's
Yeah.
not right.
No, we also have
The
a,
Topanga people are here.
Yes.
yes. And we have a landscaper.
Great. And we have someone here who's been working on the recovery from the Santa Rosa fire. Thank you for being here. So, we've been asked about a lot of things lately. I'll say this, well, I'd like to do the meeting like we did the last time, just open mic. You can raise your hand, we'll try to take you in the order that you do. Ask us questions, tell us what you want us to know. As Mikey often says, we don't know unless you tell us. We want to hear about roadblocks. We want to hear, to quote Jerry Maguire, help me help you. You know, really, because we're learning. One thing I'm seeing in government, a lot of times the fastest path is the sort of one-size-fits-all solution. And the problem with that is it's fast, but it doesn't fit all. So the trick is to try to articulate as much as possible with the city's response. That's the only thing we can control. Not the county, not the federal government or anything like that, not the insurance companies. But the more the city can articulate our response and as quickly as possible, you know, is what we want to see happen. I know Lester has some things to say about that, and I want to hear them. So that's my goal. Who wants to go first?
Let me just add quickly, then I'll hand it to you, Scott. We are just with the city, so, but I don't know that I totally agree with my dear friend Karen. I think we can control other agencies' response as well, and I think we are. They know they have to change, and we're those instruments that help them realize that what happened last time didn't work, like at 9/11 didn't work, Katrina didn't work. This is our Katrina, as far as I'm concerned. It didn't work, so we need to fix it. And more than happy to spend all the time that it takes with those agencies to help them come to those changes. And I think a big one's coming related to water flow. We're gonna hear about that soon. So yeah, and I think right now, and I was talking to a couple people here about this, we're at a stage where, I was talking to Lester about this earlier, where we're gonna encounter these roadblocks to moving forward. And if we don't know what they are, we can't help. A gentleman was very frustrated, sent us all an email yesterday, and I'm gonna meet with him tomorrow. He's already getting some resolution on his issue on his property on Harvester. So if we don't know, we can't help. So it really, my advice to everyone here, and it's helpful to us, is be vocal and don't stop, because unfortunately, to get through this, that's what you need to do. And if you're not, nobody knows, nobody cares, nobody responds. So,
Can I ask a question about the Sheila Kuehl Task Force feedback? Sorry. The Sheila Kuehl Task Force feedback online thingy. So last night I finally got all my thoughts and I went to go do it and my first browser didn't work, Firefox. So then I went to my second browser, Safari, and that one seemed to be working until I went to go upload my attachments and it hung. So I said, okay, screw the attachments, I'll copy, paste, submit. Then it wouldn't let me submit because it was hung. So then I had to start over a third time. And when I was all done and hit submit, instantly the screen just went. I don't even know if they got it. Did anyone else have a similar experience? Was it just unlucky?
mine was a little bit, I did get it in, but it wasn't instantaneous. And then when it went in, it just kind of was done.
Okay, so.
And then I looked at the screen longer and it said, thank you. And I'm like, okay, so I guess you got it?
I never
You
got
know?
Yeah.
Now,
I never got
and
it.
I did submit, I used Chrome, I submitted a ton of video, a ton of photos, a ton of stuff.
And did it take forever to download or was it fast?
None of, no, it was not quick. It was not.
Because I waited like 3 hours and it still
Oh.
said 98%. And they were just text files.
Wow.
Wow.
That doesn't sound good.
Yeah,
I don't know.
okay.
I would get a hold of Sheila Kuehl's office directly.
Yeah, okay.
Scott?
As you deal with the fire flow requirements, one of the things that I hope you remember is that there are a lot of us that are not on municipal water. And I spoke with the fire department representative upstairs just after running into Karen, who asked me to come today, for a reason I'll explain in a minute. But with regard to fire flow, they told us that the hoses that they use on properties like ours are only capable of delivering 30 gallons a minute. Our 5,000 gallon tank is good for 166 hours of fire flow. And we've been told that this brand new tank that we installed less than a year ago has to be replaced and more than tripled in size. So I do hope that that's an issue that you can address, is not just fire flow with regard to municipal water, but with regard to those who are on wells and storage tanks. The second issue is the one that I mentioned to you when we ran into each other upstairs. And Henry Stern's office is on this already. There is a section in the deeds that all of us signed when we got our loans from our mortgage companies, and it's called Section 11. And what Section 11 does is that in the event of severe damage or catastrophic loss of your home, the banks get to hold your insurance check for dwelling coverage. In our case, it's limited because we only had Fair Plan, and there's a cap on what Fair Plan will provide to homeowners regardless of the value of the home. So for others who lost their homes, who had regular insurance, the amount of money being held by the banks is even greater. There are a couple of problems with this. Number one is FDIC insurance only covers $250,000 per account. Every penny above that is not insured if the bank fails. If we had control of the money, we could establish accounts at multiple banks. Those accounts could have liens placed on them by the mortgage company so that we could not withdraw or otherwise access the funds without a co-endorser, basically a dual signature on the check. So the banks could still be protected. But at present, they can hold the money uninsured. They can do whatever they want to with this money and earn as much as they want. Not a penny of the earnings goes to the homeowner. As we all know, some homes in Malibu aren't going to be rebuilt for many, many years. That money is going to be held by the banks for many years. This is, and I confirmed this with the bank examiner, this is an issue for the Senate Banking and Financial Institutions Committee. I hope that the city of Malibu will express its support for any legislation that Senator Stern may propose in this regard.
Did
Yeah.
you, that's excellent. Did you sent an email on that second part, right? I remember hearing this before once. I just want to make sure we have an email on that. And by the way, even though you're speaking here, we really appreciate emails. A written record is really incredibly helpful. We can share it with these investigators we've hired. We can, put together our data that way. And we have this on tape too, but it's somehow something, the writing process, I can tell you as a business coach, you get more detail in it than you will here. So that first part, please email us on that too, because that's a very interesting. I hadn't heard that way before.
Can I comment on that?
Can I just say, the email, recovery ad hoc at, is it dot? Wait a minute, recovery ad hoc at malibucity.org.
Yes.
Or you can email Mikey and me directly. Our cards are here. And if you haven't signed in, I would ask you to please do so, so that we can keep talking.
Karen, what's this gentleman's name that just gave us all that great information? I'm sorry.
Scott Talal.
Talal. Okay. Oh, hey. Right.
Mhm.
Okay.
Welcome.
I thought you said Dietrich.
No.
A different Scott.
Different Scott.
I'll raise my hand.
Two Scots in a row, we should not allow that.
That's right, somebody moved.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we'll be talking to Henry about that, but Tony, please.
I don't know how to put this, but the person you were talking to lied to you. Grass companies are pulling hose that's gonna have 30 gallons a minute, right? Structure firefighting companies are clear up to 500 gallons a minute. Anything that they need, they'll pull, and the water goes along with it.
I will say that our house was the base of operations for the captain and one firefighter from 99 in the 2003 Pacific Fire. The fire captain, because of where our house was positioned, wanted to use it as a lookout for the entire neighborhood. And we had one pumper truck, and the first thing the pumper truck asked me is, he says, "How big is your tank?" I said, 5,000 gallons. He said, "Is it full?" I said, "Yes." Over the next couple of hours, this is in 2003, 70-mile-an-hour winds driving a fire right up the hill just like this one did. So the fire approached from the east. He opened up his hose, put it out. I was there. He opened up his hose, put it out, put out the fire just as it was licking the trees at the edge of the house. 3 hours later, the fire came from the south side. Opened up his hose, put it out. Overnight, 16 hours later, it came from the west side. Opened up his hose, put it out. When he left the next morning, I asked him how much water he had used. He looked at his gauge and he said 800 gallons.
Out of 5,000.
That's
Out of 5,000. And now we're being told to triple this tank
And
size.
that's absolutely correct. But if the structure is involved,
Mhm.
it's a whole different ballgame.
Right.
And that's the difference. Half of these crews on these on these fires
Mhm.
are vegetation firefighters are using those 30-gallon minute lines.
The 2-inch lines.
Right. Structure firefighting companies, they're hooking up to a hydrant, and they generally require a lot of water. If the fire gets into the structure, if it's not on the structure, or if it's just around the the vegetation, you're absolutely correct. But that's not what's burning the houses down. It's when one structure gets going, it usually burns the rest of them, or it's burning their neighbor down along with them if somebody's not
Well,
there.
we're RR5, there's no neighbor.
Yeah, well, that's even better. Right?
They're far apart.
Yeah.
Okay,
No, good.
Scott, and then who's after Scott? Gail?
Okay.
A couple things. First of all, I don't recall your name, but from Fire Safe,
Yes.
Um,
Fire safety.
I attended the Fire Safe meeting in Big Rock. There's going to be one April 8th at Camp 8, which is a Monday. On the next day, April 9th, Tree People in the Australian Consulate are sponsoring something here, their experiences. And it's amazing. Mikey, you talked about vents. Ryan, who teaches the Fire Safe, they talk about the fancy vents, and that can get pretty expensive. He puts window screen over his vents. They've got all these little tips to harden your home that aren't expensive. It's a combination of brush clearance, but things you can do to your home. And they show this amazing video of a structure that's built. You've seen it. You were at that meeting too. That the embers are just blasting into this little house that they've built for a test. What do the embers do? They fall down, and if you've got the wrong plants like bougainvillea or the pampas grass, you got a fire, it's burning, you get pine, there's all kinds of
Gutters.
stuff that
Doormats.
we can, doormats, and,
You
oh,
pull them inside if you don't want to buy an ugly doormat on a fire day, just pull them inside.
and they said, oh yeah, the embers fall down and you've got the ornamental bark. I go, ooh, we've got ornamental bark. Never thought of it, right?
Kindling, you call it kindling.
So, yeah, it's kindling.
Yeah.
But what I wanted to talk about, let's go back to 1993. I was here during that fire, and again, the fire department didn't stop it. Some neighbors, advised by the fire department from somebody up north, started lighting backfires in the mouth of Topanga Canyon by the rodeo grounds in Topanga Lane. And that knocked it down, okay? That stopped it and allowed them to get ahead of it. But in '93, after the fire, there was meetings like this, there was all kinds of meetings, there was an analysis of what went wrong. We determined that we had to put up water tanks. And, you know, years later, we don't have these water tanks. The neighborhoods will run out of water halfway through. The urban firefighters that Tony's talking about will go, there's no water in the hydrants, and they're gonna leave. It seems to me that while there are groups like this, there's a lot of people, oh, fire's over, I don't have to worry.
Yeah.
The CERT team training that just started a week ago Thursday was maxed out. The whole room. Maybe half the people showed up. That was it. Maybe less than half.
This was the second one?
Yeah, this is the second
Second
CERT.
round.
Yep.
Yeah.
Started a week ago Thursday. And, you know, all these people signed up, meaning other people couldn't get in, and they didn't show. People will get complacent unless the city really makes this, and I'm talking to city council, because the staff has their daily stuff to do. Unless we really make fires a priority, we're not gonna change anything. Some of us homeowners will be better protected, but you guys on the council really have to make this a priority. Just before the election and the fire, the city under Susan ran a simulation. We've got to evacuate for a tsunami. Well, I've lived here 40 years and I've never seen a tsunami that did anything. There's been earthquakes, been through a couple big earthquakes. We know that stuff will happen. It's the fires, over, and over. And these things, undergrounding, why haven't we done that? Well, because every time you mention it, Edison says it's too expensive. Why? Because they make their profit repairing the above ground lines. They made a lot of money off this fire. Hate to say it, but they did, repairing those poles and lines. And if that's something that has to change at state level, but the things that we can do in the city, it's a big responsibility, and you're saying the right things. We've got to do this. We've got to change the agencies, or they're not going to do anything. But we know some of the things we need to do. Start with water tanks. Just mandate that. I don't know how you mandate it in District 29. We've got to do it.
Thanks, Scott. The way I look at what you said, Scott, is I've lived here my whole life, is we have about a year of fire memories. And then everyone wants soccer fields, they want other, they just moved on. So, but I can tell you that Karen and I are really focused on making real change. Some of it will be hard. There's code changes we need to make that'll take a while, that are important. I'm a big fan of every house having a tank in one way or another, because my maybe bigger fear than fire is an earthquake, which if an earthquake comes, we're gonna probably lose municipal water. So if we don't have tanks, how are you gonna live in your house and that's the only place you'll have your sheltering space in place. So I think I kind of think of this as disaster. Now, fire's the one that comes more often, but the earthquake's the one that to me is really scary at this moment. And Gail, you got your hand up, right?
Got two Gales right here.
Oh.
Did you want, was it for you?
No, go ahead.
Oh,
I'll go after.
okay. Well, at least we're not in the same row.
Unless someone else has the same name as you can't speak.
First of all, I want to really thank you because I think it's so important to hear our voices. And I know you've been very responsive, and I'm just counting on this continuing past when everybody thinks it's important. Because I do realize that the rebuild process and the repopulating of our city it's going to be very long. It's not going to happen next year. So, on to things. I was reminded because I'm not living in Malibu at the moment, and it took me an extra 20 minutes to come up today because the light is out. But there was a police officer.
Yes.
When I evacuated, because I'm one of the people who evacuated, there were no police officers, sheriffs, CHP, or anything else at any light that I encountered between Point Doom, Heathercliff, and Santa Monica. I do understand that eventually a lane was opened. I think the fire evacuation came at 7 a.m., something like that, and the lane was opened at something like 4, later. So I believe other people have spoken to this, but I just don't want to drop the fact that I think that our evacuation plans, I realize they're complicated because just like everything in Malibu, it's not one governmental agency, it's multiple. And that has tripped us up before, we know it does. And I don't know what council can do or what you can advise our city staff to do to change that. Because on any given day we have those issues. The other thing I'd just like to speak to an issue that I've written to you about and posted about on social media, and that is the cost of permit fees for people who are rebuilding. I've seen some things that I consider funny money, where there's a projection that there'd be $10 million in fee charges that would be lost if people don't pay fees. But I've heard all kinds of things. To that issue, I would say there wouldn't be any permits purchased if homes had not been lost. So that is a funny accounting issue. There are other cities. I believe I've sent you some email about what happened in San Diego. Some of the cities, municipalities waived fees. Santa Rosa made adjustments. I also realize that there's some issues with FEMA that have to be, because some of these fees that we would not pay, there'd be pass-through costs that we'd have to try and get other governmental agencies to cover, or to cover other parts of our budgets, because it would cost some money. But since there's such a robust rainy day fund, I feel that a fire is the ultimate rainy day cost, where we can pull things out of the budget. I feel that cities have a better way of grant writing, of appealing to many different governmental agencies at the county, state, and federal level than we as individuals would. And to the people who say, well, you have insurance, I would say most people will find that their insurance will not cover a like-for-like or like +10 with all the newer codes. Even like our insurance has an acceleration for codes. There are so many new codes from the time that many of our homes were built. And we're all capped at $1, ultimately at $1 level, unless there's bad faith and we get to sue. And so anything that the city can do to help bring back the voters, the people who said yes to school bonds, the people who said yes to growing our city as a cultural city. The people who supported the city, because most of the populations in the West has been for 15 years, and that's where it got hollowed out. So the faster that all happens, and the faster that those houses go back and the property taxes go back up, I think the faster that we'll have a cohesive city. And I think it's something the city can do for us because, as I said, we're human capital. Just like we invested in the land for our futures, the future of our city when the Perenchio land came up, we should invest in our people. Thank you.
Thanks, Gail.
I took a lot from what you sent yesterday, and it was, I looked at about San Diego County doing that fire, so I was like, wow, that's really great. San Diego County has about a $6.7 billion budget. LA County has a $33 billion budget. So I think you've kind of nailed it. I think to get through this, and this is like the big issue we got to get through right now, it is multiple agencies. Malibu has to do what Malibu does, and we have to look at the feds and the state too. So after reading that and responding to you, I texted Henry, and I'm like, he's like, yeah, what do you need? I'm like, I need help on these things. He's like, okay, yeah, we're working on it. I'm like, okay. So anyhow, that's just whatever, a little story, but.
And I'll remind everybody.
I'll keep sending you more. I'll keep
Please,
sending more.
we appreciate it, we really do.
Henry Stern is well aware because he also lost his home.
Right.
So that's something. I've also started a conversation with a private entity about possible money going toward permits. So that's a conversation that's ongoing right now. And the city budget process, we're coming up for our annual budget review, which is in April. So all this is going to be taken into account. What I just learned this week, what we learned, the city's taken about $1.5 million hit, 1.5 million with non-reimbursable costs with the fire. FEMA reimbursed 75%, and then I think the state picks up the remaining, half of the remaining 25%.
Yeah, we eventually get most of the money back. The thing is that the hit on the city is passing $8 million so far. The tricky part is that FEMA doesn't reimburse very quickly. We get the vast majority back, but the last time we got FEMA money back, it took years to get some cash.
I've heard that FEMA money could be something like 5 years out.
There's a balancing act
I guess
to
not a
work out,
surprise.
but so be it. It's government, it's slow.
But you know it's going to come, so you can plan accordingly.
Hopefully, yes.
Yeah.
Neil? Oh, Gail, excuse me.
Yes, I'm going to stand. I just left church, you all, and I'm a preacher's daughter. I'm not going to preach, but I want to reiterate the fact that we need on-site water storage tanks, and especially in the Lechusa Highlands area. I'm standing representing that neighborhood. My husband and I have been trying to complete our home for the past 10 years. And a water storage tank was in our initial plans, and the fire department and Water District 29 took it out. So I'm at a loss right now because every day that we are not in our home, we are suffering loss. It's been 10 years. We are now trying to complete our home, and on-site water storage helps everybody. Everybody. True story. Our whole street was saved by 3 retired female firefighters.
I know.
Who were, I want to honor them next year, who were on site at the time checking on their relatives and used pool water to save the neighboring homes. Our property is vacant, but the foundation is in, the retention walls are in, and all the trees around our property, all of them were in flames. There were 50-foot walls of flames surrounding the Gerber's home. At the end of our driveway, we've given them an easement so that they have the driveway to get to their home. But it is time now, and it is time for the city to do something about it. It is time for the city to change the rule that was changed in the middle of our construction that caused us not to be able to complete our home for now over 10 years. And the taxes keep coming. We keep paying the taxes on property we can't sell, we can't live in it, we can't move, we can't do anything. And it's unfair. It's unfair to the people who have to rebuild. It's unfair to us. And so I'm here again. Reva Feldman said at the City Hall meeting last week that she was scheduling a meeting for me and our group with David Reitman in Water District 29. Crickets. We have not heard anything. We've not heard anything. She only sends me notes every 3 or 4 days to say, I'm waiting on a response from Water District 29. And how about we get an audit of the Water District 29 funds and what they've done with those funds for the past 10 years that were allocated for water main upgrades and for water tank and fire flow upgrades. Let's find out where the money is, because if we follow the money, we're going to find out where our repairs are.
Tell it! Tell it!
Amen.
Amen.
Thank you, Gail. I hear you on that.
Thank you.
Well said.
Neil, what?
I just want to say the process has been very slow for all of us. And the slower it goes, the more greenery comes in. The more greenery, insurance companies feel it's better off. We don't need anything. We're fine. And we're not fine. You know, we're staying in rented property, rented house. It's very uncomfortable for us. I mean, I'm not happy about it. But it's just, the hills are getting greener. The insurance companies are going to come back out and saying, you know what, your house looks fine. And our house has been burned to the ground. People say, has your house burned, what, did your house burn up? No, it burned down. So, I'm just saying it's been a slow process for all of us.
Well, let me ask you specific, Neil. Sorry, I'm wrong, right?
I've seen you at the city several times, and thanks for being here today. Is there a particular sticking point right now?
They haven't even cleaned up our land yet. They haven't scraped it.
Okay, you're in opt-out.
Opt-in.
No,
Oh, opt-in.
Opt-in.
Okay.
opted back in.
We opted out, we opted in, now we're back in.
I know the latest debris clearance schedule was published in the last few days. Did you find your street, your property on it?
We found the street, but we haven't found our property. There's no scheduling for our specific property, but the street is there. Cuthbert is there.
Cuthbert, yeah.
Yeah, there's
Probably the worst hit street.
No,
Yeah, 35 homes. It was the worst hit street, absolutely. There's an online tool that shows, I don't think it shows who's next, but it shows what's been done. So I don't know if that's any good.
You can also, the D-Rock's pretty good about, have you called the D-Rock? Have you been in touch on a regular basis with the debris removal something center, operations center in,
Yeah, they're in Calabasas, they're easy to find.
In Calabasas, you can call them or you can stop by.
But they never tell you when.
And they can, and
No,
there's
they do.
also
They told us.
a weekly newsletter that is published by the County of Los Angeles, which is on the Woolsey, they have a Woolsey Fire County site. And between those things, and if you don't, if you're very upset because you feel like you have no clue where you are in line, you can escalate to the head of the D-Rock, who then can take you to the higher up to the county people, and you can also call Sheila Kuehl's office. I know because I've done all those things, and I have, as a result, gotten information. My land is now clear, but those have.
Yeah, Gail's 100% right, and I said it earlier, and a few more people have come in. The hard part and the necessary part of this disaster recovery process is you've got to communicate at a very high level and never stop. It's exhausting. It's emotionally, physically exhausting.
It's horrible.
It's horrible, and I've been through it in the past, and you just can't stop. Because if you do, they just go somewhere else.
Yes.
You just fall off the priority list. So it's part of it, and anyhow, Lester?
So, let's see. I am consumed by this fire. It took down my house, and it took down houses of 15 clients now in our office. I'm here on my lunch break. I'm working 7 days a week, and I'll be working 7 days a week for months. It's interesting being an architect with clients like Dana, helping my friends, rebuild, while I'm doing it for my own family.
And may I add, other clients
And,
whose homes
and,
did
and,
not
and
burn
the other
down.
clients who oh, okay. You know, and trying to balance out the feeling that, you know, I owe the community something to take on all this extra work, figuring out how to do it, blah, 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 blah. But I want to talk to the two of you as 2/5 of the city council who has all the power in our city. The things that the fire burnout people are going through, it's amazing. You are hit from every side. You're underinsured. You know, you can't even get your underinsured money out of these people. The banks, Scott, I think it was Scott Talal said, you know, the banks hold the money. You got to negotiate with them to get the payments. You don't know if you can go forward because you don't even know if you're going to get your policy limits, right? It's insane. The one thing you guys control is the permit process, okay? And I have a feeling, I said to you earlier, that something's going to go wrong here. You know, like we're all excited. You know, I'm sorry for the folks whose lots haven't been cleared, but I'm going to tell you right now, when your lot is cleared, it's a big emotional lift. You're just pumped, and you want to build, and you can't, right? Because you don't have your plans. You got to get plans, everything like that. You guys need to monitor the planning department. And you need to make sure that when we're coming in with 3,000 square foot houses or 3,500 square foot houses, and the records say it's 2,000 or 25, that they don't give pushback on this stuff. Because it's the easiest thing for us as a city to deal with, right? Stamp the fucking plan, Bonnie. You know, let's go. Right? I'm telling you, this is gonna, and again, I'm hopeful. Okay, I've been in meetings with the planning department, with Doug Burge. You know, I feel like we have a good path, but I've been down this path before with other planning issues. And you think you're there, and at the right, it's like Lucy and Charlie Brown with the football. Boom. So that's that. And I have to go back to work.
Thank you, Lester.
Lester.
I share what
Also, Lester, Rebu is next weekend. Is that correct?
23rd.
Yeah.
23rd.
Yeah.
That's next.
I have no idea.
Yeah, so next weekend, Rebu, I think it's 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. up at Trancas.
I think it's 11.
11, excuse me. Okay.
And to Lester's point, I'll say it again. When we hit these roadblocks, you gotta let us know. Because it is, you know, we haven't been able to solve everything, but it's amazing some things we've been able to push back just because people let us know. And so please let us know when you hit whatever that next roadblock is, because it's hard to take action if we don't hear from you. And and the thing is, it's not everyone else in the same boat. Every fire rebuild has its own course and path and issues and differences. They're not all the same. Some things come together as the same, but some issues are very individual. So please feel free to over-communicate.
Okay, next we've got David Swartout.
Bill.
Bill Swartout, sorry. I confused you with your son.
Yeah. So hi, I'm Bill Swartout, and I want to mention maybe another concern, which is really communication. I think that we really need to put together a task force, hopefully endorsed by the city council, that really looks into the communication issues, both, you know, getting people notified that there is an event going on, and then after the event, sort of keeping people informed about what's happening. And it's both the people who are still in the city, as well as the people who are outside the city and curious about, you know, did my house make it or not? Or what's going on? And it's really more, certainly communication, keeping people informed is a big part of it, but it's also, it could be more than that. For example, I'm in the Sheriff's Department has a volunteer organization called the Disaster Communication Service. I'm in that. And we're ham radio operators, but we're also trained in things like traffic control. So imagine if you had a larger group of folks in DCS, in Malibu, and they were available to do things like when the evacuation is going on, they would get word that additional lanes of PCH were open. Well, they can help not only communicate that, but also deal with the traffic control issues that are involved. So, and I think it needs to be a comprehensive plan. I've also talked a bit to Hans Lutz of KBOO. He has some ideas about how to use satellite communication in effective ways. So I think we need to be really looking at this. I'm happy to be involved and engaged in this. So.
Thank you. I'm going to be calling you.
Excellent. I think at the moment they've tried to task our public safety commission with it. And I know the city's hiring an expert just in this area, because honestly, in my opinion, besides losing your home, the second biggest disaster of this whole thing was communication. It was absolutely, unbelievably horrible. And what I discovered as my, business and psychology degree is how addicted we are to this.
Yes.
And when we don't have it for 2 minutes now, we freak out. And I didn't realize the extent to which we're all now completely addicted to news. When I grew up in Malibu as a kid, we had fires, and there was no news, and that's just what you're used to. That's not the world anymore.
Right.
So the inability, like you so eloquently articulated, the inability to get news, for me to discover that my once a day posts on Instagram were the main news many people were getting was horrifying. I didn't have any clue. I didn't have any news with anybody.
Right.
So, yes,
What we
that
do
was a disaster.
has to be comprehensive and it's not a thing where one single approach is going to work.
Right.
You have
No,
multiple
you're right.
approaches, multiple
You're
arrows in
right.
our quiver.
And these are limited,
Exactly.
and yet we're
Part of it,
addicted to
but
them.
they're not all. Right.
So, well said. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Narcis Lobo. Thank you again for this meeting, for meeting with us. Also, Mike, I would like to thank you finally, officially, because you were the one who told us about our house during the fires, that we didn't make it. We came here 10 minutes late because of the light was out again. And so we live in Brentwood right now, so we didn't make it on time. But so I don't know if anybody already spoke about the antiquated fixture issue.
Good.
Okay, so I would really appreciate if you could kind of make a note about this and try to figure it out, because it's really hard to rebuild the houses yet go by the antiquated code and not be able to have 2 sinks in a master bathroom, just have one and stand in line to wait for your turn to actually brush your teeth or something like that. So I would like for you to kind of look into it. Thank you.
So what I know on that is that I guess the plumbing codes are state. I wish Lester was still here. He would know
Yeah, they're
better.
state.
Mike, what
There's-
is the antiquated fixtures issue?
So the flow on modern toilets, et cetera, is much less than the old ones, but yet the plumbing codes are apparently, I don't know exactly.
Yeah.
They're based on older, so that more water flow. So you're limited in the amount of sinks, et cetera, you can put in your house. But now with water flow restrictors, or less, technically that should be changed. So apparently what I've heard, but yet far from solved at all, is it's going up to the state, and it's a big deal to change it, and God, that means it'll probably be, we'll all be dead before it's changed, but still, we don't give up. But that's what I've heard the latest, but I would love to have this brought up to city council 100%.
Yes, thank you. I think that's a good idea. Because also you can't put it in DU.
Well, I'll be glad to bring that up at city council. And not to flog that too much, and also I'm a little confused because I've got a whole, I've got a whole book about what's going on from now forward, but then I also have another couple chapters on historically what happened at this fire, and I think we're doing both, I guess, here. But anyway, on this fixture issue, I think it's really an important thing. I don't know where to even really begin. I'm going to begin with, I voted for everybody that's on this council. And so I'm just saying, this council has to get together and I don't know any other way to say but to kind of grow a pair and get stuff going for the city.
Yep.
This outdated, antiquated plumbing code is enough that gets me aggravated, because I lived in a house, 1956 house, bootlegged and all that, but every single opportunity I had in that house, there's a low flow fixture. Why? Because water costs a fortune. Drip irrigation, because spraying water is a waste. Water without wind, all that stuff, on and on and on. Beat myself up with every fixture, every toilet, every shower head, everything. Washer, dryer, all that. So now I'm gonna build a new house. You're gonna put in the code already probably, I don't know, but probably low flow fixtures everywhere you go. I have a well-operated septic system. It's got a piranha in it, which I don't know why it's not required for all of Malibu. It's an incredible thing. It just should be, the city council should just get together and run this through. If it's a state thing, run it through. It's just numbers, it's just math. You know, you have 4 bedrooms, you have 50 or 40 or 30 fixtures. They're all low flow. You just have to get together and push this through, like so many other things that we're talking about here today. So I'm just looking forward to you guys doing that. And the other thing I'm going to throw out there is, I read somewhere an interesting comment, and it goes something like the first step to reform is transparency.
Yeah.
We could use a lot more of that out here. For instance, have I missed the part where the Planning Commission puts out its planning program for fire rebuilds? Has that been published? Or is they still thinking about it or working on it, or where is that?
City Council, the first part of it.
Yeah, so is it out and published what's going on yet? Or I missed that?
I'm not sure what you mean exactly.
A printed out, published version of what we can look forward to planning if you're a fire rebuild right now.
So we pushed a bunch of the fire rebuild stuff. So here's how I think it really went. And I say I think because.
Well, wait, this should be yes or no. Did you publish something yet?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, but
I
it's
missed
not
that.
done. What we did is there was a meeting with Coastal, because of course we're in the coastal zone, and they pre-agreed on some of the fire rebuild code stuff. So it was kind of a no-brainer, and then that's already been approved by Coastal, so that's underway. But we're not done, so some of the stuff that's gonna be harder to get through, that was purposely left off there because it would slow down.
Everything's harder. Why is it harder? What is it, 4 months now since the fire? 48 months? 48 weeks?
4 months and some.
It's 4 months. What is going on with the city planning commission?
It's not the city planning commission. Some things have to go through Coastal, and that can be the trickier part. So
4 months. How long can this possibly go on?
Coastal things
X amount
usually
of
take
dollars.
over a year, and we got it through in about 2 months. So I'm not gonna make excuses. It's slow and it's frustrating. It's frustrating for Karen and I, but we don't give up.
You guys have to publish why it's slow, because I don't understand that. I really don't see.
Well, like if we have to get something in Coastal, they won't even agendize things till future meetings because those are already filled. So it's hard. I mean, I understand it's frustrating, and it's frustrating for us too.
Okay, how about some publishing on what this is all about for us to understand?
Push us to the front of the
I'm missing
line.
that in the local rags. I don't understand. I'd like to see myself so it's not so.
So the fact that we can do rebuilds under essentially a remodel permit, that was the essence of it. And a +10 too, you can do 10% more. And that those two things are not in our code. And now we can do them for fire rebuilds. That was in essence what happened here already, through Coastal and through the city of Malibu. So it came to us. They'd already had a meeting with the Coastal staff who'd said, yes, that's gonna be okay. These areas maybe not, so they held on that because we didn't want to stop the whole thing. So we got that part through. Does more need to be done? Yes. And what that is a fair question, and I don't have all the answers because one of the things we're trying to find out is what all the roadblocks are. So I don't have an answer what everyone's roadblock is right now. Right now, you know, Gail's brought up a great issue on the fees, so we're trying to deal with the fees. There's been issues on people getting temporary power. That took time to try and sort through. So there's a
How's that going?
I'd say it's going, it seems like most of the people that were having a problem are now getting that temporary problem. There was a gentleman the other day that wasn't, brought it to our attention, and they've worked that out. What's interesting about, I'm gonna go off script here for a second, because your issues are good. What's interesting about being on city council is our role is making policy, and it's the staff's role to implement it. We don't implement anything, which is really hard when you want to get something done quick. So it's an interesting journey. So without your input, we don't know where to push. So I may not know. We may not know how to push. So it's really essential we hear these problems so we know where to push forward on implementing these changes. So it's frustrating all the way around. I have to agree with you.
Hello, Karen. Hello, Mikey. Thanks for responding to my frequent emails. I appreciate it.
Thanks for being here.
I think that probably the elephant in the room that nobody's quite mentioned yet is those of us with insurance, and that's not all of us, but some of us have insurance. And our insurers are providing 2 years only, with an exception that the state has mandated, but that's an arbitrary exception. It's at the discretion of the insurance company. If the insurance company determines that you're not moving with enough alacrity, they will withhold the 3rd year of additional living expense, okay?
And ours doesn't even.
And some people don't even have 2 years, okay? So the clock is ticking, and now we're into the 5th month since the fire, and we have all these issues coming up. I've said before council in the past that I feel like I'm one of the canaries in the coal mine, because I got my planning approval on the 23rd of January, okay? I've achieved nothing since. And the reason why I've achieved nothing since is I'm waiting for several things to occur. First, I have to get the site cleared. That happened. But having cleared the site, it now has to go through soil testing regimens, and the soil testing regimens can take more than a month. I cannot get my geology done until the soil testing regimens are complete. If there's a scrape, then that's going to put the whole thing another month behind while we wait for the next layer of soil testing. I'm sure the guys did a hell of a job scraping, because I watched all my life be scraped away. And let me tell you, it's not cathartic. It's distressing, at the very least, to sit there and watch everything you've spent your life working for scooped up and hauled away. By the way, I'm an architect, and I lost 50 years of practice. I don't have a single drawing of my entire career. Nothing. 0. So the 2 years, okay, the 2 years issue, the additional living expense issue, is what fronts all the rest of these issues. Now, the state codes, as we know, are antiquated, or they're conflicted. And we also know that we're still negotiating with the fire department. Apparently they're going to issue something called a memorandum of understanding, which apparently they're going to announce with great fanfare next Tuesday at City Council. I'm hoping what they announce is that they're going to reduce the fire flow requirements, and that they're going to provide some relief for the roadway access situation, where most people that have a flag lot are not going to be able to rebuild, because they're not going to be able to get 20 feet and a 70-foot wide hammerhead. Also, by the way, all that pavement conflicts with the city's planning restrictions on impermeable surface, okay? So I'm very close to the limit, and I've got 2.09 acres, and I'm really close to the limit just on what's there right now. So I've got an interesting question. I mean, I go up and I bother Craig about once every other day. He wants to know if I have anything else to do. And I said, I have nothing else to do. I don't have a house. I want to build my house, right? So one of the questions I have for Craig is, okay, a geology study. Well, what changed in my geology because my house burned down? Okay, what was wrong with the geology that was done when the house was built? Nothing's changed that I know about, unless the bottom of my house moved to China or something. So I think my geology is exactly the same. All I want to know is what were the footing loads that were used in 1989 with the county. Guess what? They don't have those records anymore. They got lost when City Hall temporarily got flooded, okay? So all they had was the permit records. Now, fortunately, I'm not trying to build bigger or smaller. Smaller meant I was going to be facing height restrictions. Bigger meant I was going to be facing an administrative design review. I don't have time or patience for an administrative design review. I know how big my house was, and I know how big the permit said my house was. It actually downsized me, thankfully, because I'm an empty nester. Carolyn and I don't need a 6,000 square foot house, but that's what I'm having to build, okay? As far as adequate funding to do it, that funding is going to be challenged by all the permit fees, okay? Every permit fee that I pay is another piece of construction that I'm not going to be able to afford. As it is, I'm building an utterly simple house. which I'm going to make as tasteful and as zen as possible. But all of these are compromises that we should be able to manage effectively in a timely manner. But what I keep bumping into, and everybody else is going to bump into the same constraints, is that each one of these steps is actually much longer and much more complicated, and it's full of unknowns. And it's the unknowns that are driving us up the wall. What we need is not Craig George doing his job as directed by his management, okay? What we need is for Craig or somebody in his capacity to be designated the rebuild czar, so that he can then, or she, can cut through all of the regulatory constraints and streamline this process genuinely. Because currently it's not streamlined, it is business as usual.
Yep.
I agree.
And by the way, one last point that Carolyn just reminded me of. The city of Malibu has a significant rainy day fund. If this is not the rainy day, what is? Thank you.
I just have one thing to say that is a little pet peeve of mine. I said at the very first city council meeting that the cover-up was going to start, and I've noticed now that the politicians are no longer referring to it even as a fire. It is now an incident. The Woolsey incident. Now please, this is a disaster, it's a catastrophe, it's the worst thing that's ever happened in our lives. Don't downgrade it to an incident.
Yes.
Thank you. I think some of that comes from the terms that these agencies use, like incident command,
To downgrade it.
incident report.
To cover it up. Osby was the first one who used it.
Yeah.
They started talking about the Woolsey incident, and I went, what?
What was the Woolsey incident?
Yeah.
Like aliens invaded.
Aliens invaded.
It was a bad mystery novel.
Gail and then Jane.
Quite an incident.
I just have one thing to say, to piggyback on what you were saying about your geologist report. Just prior to the Woolsey fire starting, we were given a list of about 30 new geologist changes and fire code changes that we had to meet before we come back for plan check and approval on our plans. That have been approved, by the way, about 10 times now. And every time you go back, you have to pay more fees in order to have them recheck to see that you've gotten everything on the, I'm in holding right now on my plans because I'm waiting on Darryl Osby to issue the new fire codes. And what they are, we need somebody on him to make sure that he issues the new fire codes and what they are so that we can meet them and go in one time, get it approved, and then start the rebuild process or the building process. This is just crazy to me. I'm just incensed at what has happened to my husband. This house was started 10 years ago. So yes, you know, we feel for you, those of you who have to rebuild, because I'm telling you, it is not gonna happen quickly. And every time you go in with a new set of plans, not to mention the printing of the plans that has to happen every single time, but every time you go in, there's another fee. So I really want to see either they can waive those fees now, because that fire was nobody's fault. We didn't ask for this. They didn't ask for this. And now we've got to do a new fuel modification plan, I'm told, because, you know, now vegetation too close to the house, you know, if it catches fire, your house is going up. I'm just saying, make sure in your fuel modification programs you use a lot of rock. Because rock saved my neighbor's house. That's the only thing.
Thank you.
Thank you, Gail. Okay,
One
Jane.
question on your house. Did you do an opt-in or opt-out? You did opt-out.
I did opt-in.
Oh, you did?
I did opt-in, yeah.
I thought they did the soil. See, I'm learning. I thought they cleared your soils at that time.
Okay,
no?
the crew that does the opt-in work, okay, let me tell you, they're extremely conscientious. And not only really conscientious, but also very empathetic, and they're really lovely folks, absolutely lovely folks, and pros, unbelievable pros. I mean, the guy handling the big backhoe was extraordinary. The guy's name was
Bunches.
Bunches, yeah, Bunches. Yeah, he had tattoos all over his head. I said, "You got tattoos everywhere?" I said, "Please don't show me." Right? Anyway, way cool folks, and they're great. Okay, they do an optical. All right. So they, based on the fact that they've been doing this for a long time, this particular crew's been working together for 6 years, and they've done a lot of fires together. all the way up north in Northern California, the fire is up by Shasta, etc. No, what has to happen then is then another group comes in after they're done and they move off the site. Another group comes in and they set a whole series of sensors, okay? And they're all flagged, okay? There's probably a dozen at my site, okay? They're all flagged, and in a month, they remove the sensors and then put them in a lab, okay? So once they've cleared your site, you're not cleared yet, okay? And my geologist cannot get an excavation permit until the site gets certified as being cleared, okay? So then he has to go in for a permit after that, all right?
Meanwhile, we have basically a swimming pool. They cleared so much and took so much earth, and along with all of the debris, we've got a giant hole now full of all these flags that we're waiting. They had to put a fence around it so nobody will fall in the hole. Lord have mercy.
By the way, my geologist says that there's also going to very likely be an archaeological question raised. And my answer to that is the only archaeology you're going to find is what's left of my 72-year life, okay? I'm sorry, but I'm not a Chumash, all right? Or anything else. Yeah, that's a threat that's sitting out there, okay?
Okay, we're not going to let that happen. That makes no sense at all. I mean, none of it makes sense. Thank you for sharing that, because I wasn't aware of the flags. I didn't realize that part, because last time when my house burned down, we didn't have to do that. So things have changed. Thank you.
Okay. Jane?
Just more time.
And then
more time.
A couple of things before I make my own comments. You know, things came up today that were very good. I don't know about everybody else, but one thing that didn't happen too well here, I do think it does did other places, is quickly publishing some sort of list of what houses made it. Because particularly for those people who had evacuated, they were struggling to really find out. So you might just put that on your list of things has to be done.
I can tell you why that didn't happen here.
Yeah.
The amount of looting was a little weird, bigger than most people realize.
So it was intentional?
Yes, because yeah, there was a looting issue. There was one in my neighborhood. We caught a looter. There was looting on Cavallari, and a lot of people who were evacuated, not a lot, too many people who were evacuated came back to find their homes broken into. So that's
a good point. Maybe we could think about having a list that only residents could access, and we'll have
someone could get into
and
that.
The problem was, the reason I was telling so many people is because all the people in the city were evacuated, and I just refused to leave, so that's why I was able to do it.
One other question, you brought up a good point, Mikey, which is that getting things on the agenda of the Coastal Commission, is there any way that State or Henry Stern or somebody could put pressure on the Coastal Commission to put emergency matters, no?
Maybe, yeah, I'm not sure.
Well, in any event, the 3 points I wanted to make was, one is, of course, you know, my favorite thing is the California Fire Reserve Corps. Wanted to give a little update. At this point, I'm happy to report that there seems to be some real interest within the fire department, both CAL FIRE and LA County. Very early, if this happens, you know, even if it just got sped through, it'd probably take 2 to 3 years to make progress, but they're genuinely, one person said they're genuinely intrigued, the other person says, I think this idea has legs.
Yay.
But the reason and actually at this point, one person within CAL FIRE is going to work up, try to begin to work up numbers and real logistics to see if they think it would work. My request for you all is that if you go to Sacramento, if you like this idea, don't be shy to mention it to the governor. And the reason I say that is not only common sense, but the fire department told me what we can do most of all is provide them the political support to help get it implemented. And I'll also remind you that this is not instead of the volunteer efforts we're making here. This is in addition to. So the other thing thought I had for you and Karen, which by the way, can't thank you enough for all you're doing. You're doing a fantastic job, is deadlines. I think as you move forward in your work and as you hire the consultant, I would recommend that you establish realistic but demanding deadlines, maybe even ambitious deadlines. I think, and in addition, I would recommend that you make those deadlines public so that people say, we're doing this and the report's going to be out X. I think it helps get things done, but I think also it's an assurance the public needs to have. I think we all are sitting and waiting on the Mueller report. There's not a deadline there for good reason, but I think you know the difference is when you say that it's one thing to have your internal deadlines, but to announce to the public, you're going to have a report from us on such and such a date. So that was what, because there also, as you pointed out, Mike, you know, people do lose focus after a year, but there is an urgency to this, not only because of fire. I do think the next big thing that's going to hit us is an earthquake. Yeah. So it's not something that, a problem that goes away. The next thing is action. Of course, the challenge is to translate those recommendations into action. I would just remind you that studies have shown that highly successful people always favor action over inaction. Might not be perfect, there might be future things they want to do, but when in doubt, act as opposed to don't act. And the third point along those lines is, you know, things like sirens. I know you're working on them, but there can be things that are done already. I'll also point out that in another 3 months, we're getting to be, what, 7, 9 months after the fire. It takes 6 months to get these recommendations. You're talking it's a year after the fire, so time does go quickly. And in that realm of action, as one person mentioned here, one thing that really hit me as I drove down Dune Drive, one of the Hartford streets, was any psychological advice for anyone who's gone through a trauma is to get it over with as fast as possible. And so the most the city can do, and we've all talked about it today, is to help people rebuild those houses and put this in the past as soon as possible. The longer it goes along, the longer it stretches out the trauma. So that's the fourth point, and I don't know if you guys can address it in the work you're doing, but with what happened in New Zealand, with what happened in Thousand Oaks, the terrorist incidents, we live in a wonderful world out here, and as Mikey, as you know, I believe in live and let live. And I think the fact that we don't have excessive security provisions out here is part of what makes it nice. But is this something we need to think about? You know, that New Zealand's a very, very safe community. And, you know, is this something we should think about? And I don't know if that's, you know, it would be a disaster if something happened. I don't know if it's under the purview of this or not. And that's all.
Thank you, Jane. Ted, right behind you. If I was king of Malibu, there'd be a whole gun control thing, but we'll get into that later.
At a recent city council meeting, I examined what happened the day of the fire and immediately after, and I made the comment that the city of Malibu was a rudderless ship. Reva didn't like that, and so she called me the next morning to tell me why I was totally wrong on that. That caused me to think about comment number 2, which is, you said you do policy and it's up to the staff to implement. There's one way to change that, and that's if we have an elected, full-time Malibu mayor who the city manager reports to. You have that, you're going to have a different situation. I appreciate everything you do as elected members of the city council. It's a part-time job. Your pay isn't nearly enough. But essentially, if you had a full-time manager whose pay was $300,000, I think we would have had a different situation at the time of the fire. We would have a different situation now as far as the permitting and everything is concerned. Mayor.
Salary of $300,000.
That's what I said, because that's what Reva gets. Reva gets $300,000.
Wow. Yep.
$300,000. Yeah, it's 240 plus benefits, so it's probably more.
Yeah. That's all I have to say.
Yeah.
Wow.
One of the most, she's one of the best paid city managers.
Can you say your name? Oregon Garcetti.
Because she does such a great job.
Next. Yeah, I just wanted to second permitting, fast forward the permitting piece, fast tracking, thank you. Because like our insurance, Allstate, they only recognize 2 years for ALE, and we ask as high as the executive level, and they said, nope, there's nothing they're gonna give us past 2 years for ALE.
Well,
That's that.
by law of the state of California,
They don't recognize
no,
that.
but the I want to just speak to the elderly 1 second. Because
Okay.
some people have, excuse me,
Talk about
I just wanted to speak to the ALE, because I've been into this with several people. like the way our insurance is written, we have a cap. And if we live a different lifestyle, it'll last a little longer than what it was arranged for the house that we were living in. We are living a different lifestyle right now. And the state of California put into law, so you should check with it, that's up to 36 months, but there are a lot of provisos of how the insurance can get out of it. Mainly you have to show good faith that you're moving along and so forth. And you may have to engage an attorney to prove your point, but the state did implement something that went into effect.
There's confusion on this particular issue. There is a clause that excludes the ALE from that 3 years.
From the rest.
And for some reason, very few people are looking at that particular clause in the actual bill as passed.
And we do have attorney look.
We've had many attorneys look at this. This is big.
You know.
But the point, but I think what we're all saying is that
time is critical.
These clocks are ticking and nothing's moving as it should, even despite everyone's best efforts. So there needs to be a different method.
And I'm an eternal optimist, but also as a 7-year planning commissioner, I'm worried about that too, because I felt sorry for every single application that came before us, just because of how long it took. So I do worry about that greatly. I totally agree with you, and I hear you loud and clear. And that's why, once again, don't sit around quietly waiting for anybody on anything. And I know it's totally unfair, totally it's exhausting. Don't stop calling, visiting, getting an email, because unfortunately, there's so many homes burned down. You have to basically be your own advocate or hire somebody, which makes no sense. So it's not an easy situation.
I have one more question about gray water. I don't know how that's being handled in Malibu, but right now with all of the rebuilds, shouldn't we kind of look at this and make it much more easier for us to put gray water system into, hands are up. Okay, here we go.
Plumbing code does not recognize that gray water would reduce your septic flow. So you can do all the gray water you want, but you're going to suit yourself. It's not going to help you on the fixture count issue.
But let's require them to change that.
Well, exactly.
I have a
That's
master
what I mean.
bathroom and a laundry room.
Yeah, you're talking about making a lot of sausage at the state of California level. This is uniform plumbing code. It's an international code. Of course, it's not impossible. I'm an architect. I've been dealing with codes for 50 years.
This is a disaster.
But they are highly resistant to change.
I'm not arguing with you.
Yeah, I know.
I agree with you. I'm just saying, let's find out who's going to say no to that.
Don't they only you would know? Don't they only review it every so many years? Isn't that true? They won't even.
There's really no pressure. Okay.
There you go.
So there's
no pressure because the International Congress of Building Officials they have protocols. Primarily what they're concerned about is lateral forces, earthquakes, and fire resistance. And that's what they focus on. Every time the code is revised and reissued, primarily that's where the focus is, okay? And you're gonna find out right now, if you've got a retaining wall taller than 6 feet, if you've got foundations that are gonna be more than 4 feet deep, you'll have a whole set of new seismic regulations that are gonna have to be satisfied. Pretty much doubles the cost of your foundation. And this is all just within the latest edition of the California State Building Code. The codes dominate, and the building officials are required by law to enforce the codes as written, okay, as is the fire chief, which you've just been dealing with. He has to deal with the way the code is written, and then he can override the code, which is what he's done.
And we should all start drinking green beer right now while we're doing that. Just a thought.
Well, I could do this with an Irish accent. So heavens be God, we can get this faster maybe?
Scott, and then, well, Neil's been waiting. Neil and then Scott.
I'd just like to know, with all the problems we've had, would people stay here in Malibu or fight the fire themselves? I mean, or evacuate?
This fire or any
I
fire?
think everybody has their own take on that. I don't think there's any general answer.
Because the beach is plenty safe. I mean, you could go down to the beach and just be, if you know your house is going to burn out.
Can I just say, we left. We'll never do it again.
Can I respond
So,
to that?
let me give this a stab. I stayed 2, as has been published. Almost got arrested, didn't. But, so what I talked about with Chief Osby, talked about with our sheriff department, the new leadership there, is our neighborhood fire brigade. We have one in my neighborhood. And they, at this point, are fine with us bringing that forward as a model to other neighborhoods. Did ours work perfectly? Not even close. And everyone's saying, oh, you have the best fire model. I'm like, really? If you were there? It was just a bunch of guys running around, garden hoses, really. So here's what concerns me as someone who stayed. If people just blanket stay and they're not prepared, people will die. That's just a fact. It's just gonna happen. I have fire gear, I have fire equipment, I know how to use it, I have pumps, hoses, you know, the whole outfit, and still, it got iffy at times, especially on Point Doom Friday night. We got overrun, and that was a real thing, and it was scary. So,
What do you mean?
embers, a wall of embers just cascading on us relentlessly, and we had to evacuate, and we had to run.
They went over there to help put out.
Yeah, I went over there Friday night, because our neighborhood, finally a couple of firemen showed up, so we were like, okay. And there was a few people watching the hotspots, we ran over there, and it was a firestorm, which.
You had water the whole time? Yeah.
We did, very fortunate, because we have a large tank on the hill above Malibu West. I'm told it was 1 million gallons, but I think it's 500,000. And when you only have 7 people saving 238 homes with fire hoses, I mean, we had a couple hoses, but with garden hoses, we didn't use up that water, we didn't even touch it. So here's what I would say. Obviously, I've never left during a fire. But you gotta be prepared. And a lot of it's up here. When the fire came into my neighborhood down Trinkus Canyon, it was a wall of flames, and it was scary. And it threw rocks at us. I didn't even know fire did that. And it picked up the earth and threw it at us. It was going by us, trying to surround us. It was, and I think as that fire approached, there was like 8 guys. It got closer, turned around, there was like 6 guys. And there was like guys driving up and U-turning and just never stopping. There was 3 of us, I believe, when the fire hit. And we just were like, all right, we ready for this? Let's do it. And you know, we knew what we were doing. We knew how to fall back. We had escape plans. We had 2 escape plans. We had the gear. We weren't trying to be heroes. We were just trying, we were prepared. And that's, if people want to stay, you really got to have a plan. You need a plan, and you got to execute it. As soon as we evacuated the 2 families, we had multiple families in my house because one of their houses burned down in Malibu Lake. And as soon as they left, my son and I, who he knows a lot about fire, we set up the escape routes. We got them ready. Cars ready, keys in the ignition, facing down the drive, down the street, ready to go. The last digit pool, our neighbor's pool, which you don't want to do, but we had multiple layers of items to bring to the pool to cover ourselves. If they burned, replace them as best we could. Not anything you want to do, but just in case. And then we got out all the equipment, we set it up, then we went to the fire. So if we hadn't stayed, we might have lost 200 more homes in my neighborhood. We lost 21. But the fire was real. And so my only thing about everyone, I know everyone wants to stay, just be ready, be prepared. Like, take a class, join your neighborhood, volunteer, help form one in your neighborhood, be ready. And a lot of people in Malibu were pretty ready. And a lot of them that stayed were pretty ready. And then people that, you know what, my wife left, she would never stay and she shouldn't, but she helped so many people outside of Malibu. So she did her part. You know, the crew at Point Doom did their part by feeding people. People came to Malibu West Beach Club and fed us and helped us. Greg and Christy at Christie's restaurant fed us, you know, while we were, you know, after we saved houses. So everyone does their part, but it's important to figure out what your part is in a disaster and be ready. If you haven't done CERT training, please, please, please consider doing that. Is it the end all and be all? No. For myself, I'm on arson watch. That's another thing people can look at. There's a medical team forming to help out during disasters, and there's a lot of professionals in Malibu that are talking about that, and I think it's a fantastic no-brainer idea. We need ID for even if people are evacuated, that doctors can be here. They couldn't even get in last time. They had trouble with that. We need better plan for animals. I mean, some of the animal stuff, I don't even want to talk about. It was so horrifying when I was here. People weren't prepared for their animals. So there's a lot of parts to a disaster, and I think knowing your part and being ready to play your part, whatever that is, if your part is you got 3 little kids at home, your part should be getting your kids out of Malibu. So, you know, but everyone can play their role, and that's just what I want to say about that.
And I want to add one thing to that. The city is in the process of, there's a job application opening now. A new position has been created. I think it's called Fire Safety Specialist. And it's basically geared toward a retired firefighter to come on board, work with the city, and go to work with specific neighborhoods, Malibu West, Point Doom, Malibu Park, and maybe there will be subgroups within those neighborhoods because, as somebody pointed out in the last meeting, you're not going to know what your neighbor 6 blocks away is doing, but you ought to know what your neighbors down the street are doing. So that position is open right now. If you know anybody that you think is a good candidate for that, please ask them to apply. Okay.
Before
Yeah.
we move on to another subject, I think
Jane.
It's just a question for Mike.
Here, let me give you the mic so that the camera can pick it up. Dana, I have not forgotten.
Mikey, is there a plan? We've heard about Malibu West organization and Big Rock's organization. On Point Doom, just met with Pam Mulick yesterday about trying to reactivate or form a neighborhood association for that and other purposes. So I'm CERT trained. This CERT training isn't enough to help you fight a fire. What can we do to get the neighborhoods trained?
That's part of what we're doing. That's part of what we're doing. And we had Keegan Gibbs from Point Doom came to our meeting. So he was very helpful, and he wants to help bring that forward on Point Doom. So not that he'll be the only person, but that's what we're doing, and we're not there yet. So I don't want to like, because guess what? We have to work with outside agencies. So I'm going through this arson watch routine, which is just part of it, because it gets me a certain idea I really want. Yeah. In Clue, but there's more to it, and so we're still getting that evolved. So I'm not withholding information. I just don't have the facts yet.
Did you actually stay through the firestorm?
Yes, he did.
Wow. Okay.
Also, Zuma Beach is a good evacuation place.
My family's evacuation place until things change is Zuma Beach, by the way. It's nowhere else.
So also, we were talking about the access back to Malibu. Whatever happened to, we used to once upon a time have these dolphin stickers on our cars. What happened to that? So that was very easy to recognize.
They're just to identify residents. They're not an access in emergencies.
Right,
Yeah,
but
the
at least they knew
dolphin
that we're
sticker's
residents.
not a guarantee. We, sorry, Gail, what?
I was just saying, I had one, one of the first ones in the program. It never once helped me do anything. When there's a line of 80 cars, and the sheriff's, you're 80 back, it doesn't matter.
So nobody recognized
Well,
that.
we-
It doesn't work in Topanga.
Yeah, we had city council members who came close to getting arrested, trying to get back in. That I think once the sheriffs outside of Lost Hills were brought in from all over California, they were given a blanket order, don't let anybody through.
But you could walk around.
What you just said, I agree with 100%. However, it's March. April, May, June, it's coming. So if you want to talk about right now, we need shelter-in-place information. It's not like, you know how they say if you give them birth control, they'll be, promiscuous. If you give us shelter-in-place information, then if we get trapped, or I don't know about you guys, but I know so many people who stayed, who will stay again. They don't look at it the way you do at all. And if they know at least how to protect themselves, so if we could soon get some kind of, from the top, here's what you need, the space blankets, the respirators, whatever it is, or maybe even a few community places, because if you get trapped in Topanga and you can't get out, so at least you could go to the elementary school, large parking lot, and if they had a big, storage facility of the blankets and the respirators. Something soon for shelter in place.
Yeah, that's a great point, and I know, like, just a detail on that. So when we got into our emergency supplies in Malibu, and it took a while, my son and I managed to, with city manager's help, get into a couple of them. They were for earthquakes. There was absolutely nothing of value in them, and that was one of those, oh, yeah.
Cots.
Yeah, there was cots. I'm not sure good. So it's a great point, and that. Soon is, yeah, it's government, but yeah. Good. Soon for government would be like, well, we dead. But yeah, I agree. I just think it's an interesting issue. I don't have all the answers. Everyone should have N95 masks at their house minimally anyhow.
I know, but a lot of that information is, they sit on it because they're like, well, then people won't leave, and that's a fantasy. People stay.
Well, and here's the other irony. So in a fire, we're all supposed to evacuate. In an earthquake, we're all supposed to stay.
Right.
And yet,
well, sheltering in place in an earthquake is different.
gas mains are broken.
You need water, but you don't face a fire.
Fire can start.
Your lungs don't burn when you inhale after.
If there's a fire from the earthquake.
But not like what you withstood. You could have lost your lungs.
Okay, we have speakers in the very.
I just wanted to go backwards a bit and respond to Neil's question. If this happens again, are you going to stay or leave? And that brings me to this whole report to Sheila Cool. The most infuriating thing almost, already my house already burnt down, but the most infuriating thing was trying to get back into Malibu for the next 9 or 10 days afterward. My wife and my son shuttled some cars to Zuma, and my son's car was there. He was out of town on a job. He came back, he couldn't get his car. I couldn't get him in to get his car. I couldn't get to my house or property. And I'm driving a big truck, giant truck. I'm not driving up in a little Honda Civic or something that you don't want to drive around the roads on. It was infuriating trying to get into Malibu as a resident. So because of that, I'm just not going to leave next time. In fact, I wouldn't have left if I was there. I was here in '93. My house was on Carbon Canyon. I stayed there. My neighbor, Dan Sislo, and I were there until the very end. And then we had, like you said, we were prepared, escape routes and plan, and pointed in the right way. Because if, the fire shut down those little tiny roads down Los Flores, we wouldn't have made it. But still, I guess my point is, because of that whole incident, it's just, I would not leave anymore, no matter what. You can always go to Zoom and camp out. And that's how I would have to be on the next one for me. So that's just response to you.
So the best thing I can tell you on that at this point is, so we've met with Osby and his crew, we've met with the sheriff and their crew, and in each meeting I led them on this trail of the trauma that we all are going through because of this. And it was kind of a setup. And the trauma, so then we couldn't get out. People thought they're gonna burn to death, and then you couldn't get back, and you didn't have any information, and then nobody was telling anyone. I led them on this trail, and the last part of the trail was, because everyone's nodding their head, was, and so now nobody's going to leave.
That's right.
And so no one's going to leave, and if they burn to death, that's something you've created with your policy that did not work.
Yep, that's right.
Yeah.
So they're very aware of it, and so I don't have an answer as we sit here, of course, because once again,
It's not for everybody, by the way,
No, it's really not for
You're
everybody.
85 and you're
I want to give a much better idea instead of staying. Build a home that can defend itself.
But, well, what, 2 months?
Yeah, I'm just saying, in general, have your home prepared to withstand. It may still burn down, but if a huge firestorm is coming, which I don't think these fires are getting any smaller, at least, like my home, to be honest, we just remodeled a couple years ago. I wasn't near my home, except for a couple times when my cul-de-sac caught fire. But other than that, I wasn't near it because I knew it was very good odds it would not burn. Metal roof, no wood on the outside, no foliage close by that could get hot and get the house hot.
You're unique.
I've lived in Malibu my whole life too. When we rebuilt this wreck of a house, it was like, okay, we got to make this house a fire safe. And it's also how I got insurance, because they weren't going to insure it. So just mindset of living in a high fire zone. That's all I'm sharing, maybe.
Okay, Tony Schaefer?
What's that red thing on top of your house?
That's a different story. That's like nuclear war, but I'll get to that later.
I just wanted to add one thing.
every one of our communities should have fire-safe zones that people can retreat to.
Yes.
They need to be identified by
Yeah.
city planning, et
Yes.
cetera, et cetera. There are standards. There are standards based on fuel height and fuel loading for the size of a safety zone.
Whatever, they just need it.
They absolutely need it, but they need to be identified. They need to be identified, they need to be on city maps,
Yeah.
they need to be places, because these are places that those engine companies are gonna come to hang out when that firestorm is coming through.
And in Topanga, they kind of naturally occur because they're the only place where you can park the engine.
That-
We don't have a whole lot of real estate.
No, I agree with that. Sometimes they're at intersections, you know, and the houses around that intersection are set far enough back and the vegetation is cleared up. But those need to be identified along with those escape routes to get both from your house to get to them and everything. So that's my only comment. But I think that's really essential, and that's because
You get trapped.
my view totally is for the next fire.
Yep.
How to prepare for the next fire, not necessarily worrying about the last fire.
Yeah, thanks, perfect.
Thank
That's
you,
a great,
Tony.
great point.
Let's see.
These people I know.
Scott, Carolyn, Carrie.
We all pay huge taxes, and it seems to me that we should not be dependent upon ourselves to fight fire. We have firemen who did not respond. We now find that it's our responsibility because the fire hydrant doesn't have enough flow. And if what are our taxes going for? Aren't we supposed to have fire hydrants provided that have enough flow? They weren't even opened. But we're paying taxes, and now I'm hearing that it's up to us to have fire gear and to fight the fire ourselves. What about super scoopers? What about pumping water from the ocean? What about making fire breaks? When I was a kid, there were fire breaks through all the mountains that stopped the fires. What the hell happened? And why can't this be done? And why can't the money be, I mean, there's so much money spent, and we're paying such big taxes. And it seems to me to now have everybody saying, you know, man up and fight the fire yourself. That's not right.
It's more
Your point's really good, and where I come from, you're right. You're right. Our hydrant system, our fire department system was set up for structure fire. It was not set up for these giant wildfires. It just wasn't. We actually don't pay the taxes to have a fire force big enough to defend us from our 20-year firestorm.
We have an ocean.
We just don't have the system. These fires have gotten, the last 5 years, have grown and gotten bigger. I'm not making excuses for them. So you're right. We need to keep pushing for better services. I just want to be ready when they don't happen to work in my neighborhood. I want to have a plan, because when there's 3 or 4 or 5 of these major fires, there's just not enough resources. And we experienced that firsthand, and it was devastating. So you're right.
But it's reality.
But reality is, nobody was here, and I don't think they didn't want to be here. They made a call, and the fire blew by them, and they were at other fires, and next thing you know.
We live half a mile from a fire station. We have 2 hydrants within 750 feet of our house.
No, 400.
Nobody on either side of us burned, and not one fireman came to our house. It wasn't like it swept through. It burned, something caught our house on fire, and it burned, and no one came. Half a mile, everything, 250 feet cleared around our house. Now, explain that to me. We evacuated because we thought we should, because that's what we were
Your
told
house
to
burned
do.
because embers got into it somewhere, and
no one came to help.
And nobody came to help.
That's why people stay now.
Okay, Scott, and then Carrie?
A couple points. There's eight fire engines in 21 miles of Malibu. Not very many. After the recession in 2008 and 9, I don't know the number, maybe Tony does, but lots of guys got laid off. The number of strike teams went way down, which is why somebody on the force today can get so much overtime, because they don't have the other guys. It's actually cheaper to pay them overtime. But when you run into a major fire, there's nobody there. On November 1st, CAL FIRE let go, because it's seasonal, 600 guys.
Yep.
There's 700 communities that no longer participate in the mutual aid. And I don't know all the reasons for that, but the number of firefighters we have is way, way down.
That's right.
You're right. We don't have the fire breaks anymore, and now they're trying, I don't know, well, I don't know why, they're trying to reduce the amount of brush clearance you need to do. Makes no sense. In terms of having fire refuge areas, Jefferson is working on that. I know, I saw the maps he had. He's trying to get permission from a couple of the private entities like Duke's Restaurant to sign off that they'll allow that to be an official refuge. So that is something the city's doing, I know. But my question, I had a question, you know, you were talking about grants earlier. I'm wondering if it would make sense to try to get a grant for water tanks, whether that's on individual properties or community bigger ones. Yeah. But maybe we could get them for, you know, I don't know how many gallons, a couple thousand gallons, and, you know, get a grant for those and then let people put them in. That would add so much to the community, and I think, you know, and then of course having the big ones would be great, so we don't run out.
Well, if I was king of Malibu, I would codify every house having a tank. I would.
I nominate.
It's reality. We saw that.
Can I get a
saw the
second?
waveguard system being used, which is good. I think it could be a little more perfected. But that system senses heat and it has its own tanks, and the whole house is covered in water, and it's
Exterior
like,
sprinkler system.
yeah, pretty cool. That idea makes perfect.
Yeah.
It's called a waveguard.
Yeah.
It's on the.
And they,
that's right.
House in the Palisades has it, and they did a demo for us.
Yeah, and it literally
I stood right in the middle of the
Yeah.
umbrella. It was pretty awesome.
Yeah.
And it creates its own ecosystem. Like Calamigos Ranch has a
Exactly.
high-level system that creates its own wet
Wet
ecosystem
land.
when a fire
Right.
comes. So
And they did not burn, right?
that house in the
They did not burn.
that house looked. I didn't get to see it all. Like 3,000 square feet, maybe.
The Palisades?
That house,
Yeah,
3,000.
not a very big
Not a
house,
huge
it's
house.
highly flammable.
All rough
all
wood.
wood.
Where was
All
it?
wood.
Really?
I'll find the
Up
address.
a little road that you went up, or a little road.
It was up Bienvenida and off there.
Waveguard,
Waveguard.
which it's looked pretty expensive.
I think it cost $65,000.
It was
Yeah,
expensive.
not cheap.
Yeah.
$30,000.
Yeah.
I talked to the homeowner, she told me 65.
It's cheaper than a whole house.
True, this is true.
Private water tanks are running,
I think there's
30
other ones,
to
I've seen
50,000.
photos out of Australia of some systems there that look, to be honest, a little even better. Like, it just creates a little ecosystem so the embers don't burn your house down.
Right.
And it's all self-contained.
Okay.
I just wanted to make one comment on the grant
Mary's
money.
still waiting.
I was just looking at the California state budget. There's about $1 billion that's available for fire protection grants from the state over the next 5 years. And the venue to get into it, or the way to get into it, is through fire-safe communities. And the money is, they're not using it because there's not enough fire-safe communities in the state or people applying for the grants. So there's tons of money, you just have to basically ask for it and have a decent plan.
And I think Susan is trying to do that to make Malibu fire safe. But if it makes sense, to have those individual water tanks, that would be a great application. Call Malibu Fire Safe Community, because we've had all these meetings. See what we can do.
They have a great website too you can check out. Actually, so, okay website, there's a website, okay.
And just quickly, how many people stayed? Do we know what percentage of the homes that were lost, or do we know what percentage stayed? Any ballpark estimates?
homes
How many people
saved,
stayed? I think in the fire zone, a couple hundred stayed.
Couple of hundred people out of how many? 2,000?
More.
3?
No, more. 5,000, 6,000 in the fire zone at least, maybe 7.
I have the fireman at PCH at Heathercliff. I stayed. Do we know why those firemen didn't come up and help me? Do we know, have any idea?
Same reason
No, I
they
was
didn't
in the
help me,
middle of the
same
street
thing.
begging them to come in.
Here's my guess, and I've talked
Yeah,
to
that's what I
Osby
want.
about that, because, and answer me this, because see if you had the same experience I did. Were they LA County Fire Department, or were they from somewhere else?
Lots, all different. See, I
Yes.
was at PCH in the
So-
middle of the street at Heathercliff.
What?
There were 10, 15.
The main first responders to Malibu, I think, from what I'm starting to see, and it can't be entirely true, were from other areas. They weren't LA County Fire. So they weren't apparently trained in our kind of fire. They're urban firefighters. I'm not sure what. The guy who came to my neighborhood was from San Diego, and he would not help. He was worried he was going to be trapped, and he told me he had no orders, which apparently scared him enough to not help. So
That's gotta change.
Did he have water?
I didn't have enough time to hang out and ask him. I went back to fighting the fire, and then about an hour later, I thought it was him that came up, but when I look at my videos, it's LA County that came in. All they really did, when they finally showed us, put out houses that were fully ablaze to save the houses next door. And actually, they did save Mike Matthews' house, so take that back. We were fighting to save that one. But it's a huge question. We've asked Osby directly about this, and all of his lieutenants, or whatever they're
Does
called.
Osby have the little black mustache?
He's the fire chief for LA
Fire
County.
chief.
For LA County.
Yeah.
Who's the fire chief for here?
That jump
Anthony Williams?
Oh,
And he's gone now, right?
No, he's still there.
Who was moved?
Mikey, what was the response to that?
The sheriff. The
He
sheriff.
said they weren't LA County.
I can.
When you asked Osby a question about what they're all doing,
Actually, the only thing, their head guy in this area is another guy named, wonderful name, Tony Maroney.
Sounds like a pizza restaurant.
I know. Apparently the guy's a great guy, I've only met him a little bit, but his question goes, were they LA County? And I was like, huh, so I pulled out my phone and looked at my video, I go, no, they weren't. Well, I knew they were San Diego. And then I looked and saw that the LA County guys engaged. So something happened there, and they were very serious, they were really upset about this. And I believe them, maybe I'm wrong, but, and they really wanted to explore this because it really floored them to hear this. They were like, how is that even possible? And I said, it's possible because the story's told over and over and over and over by so many of us here. And so they're extremely aware, and we will make sure they remain aware. I suspect I hear all sorts of reasons it happened. They're upgrading their communications. They couldn't talk, and all sorts. I know the guys in my neighborhood could not call anybody.
So back to transparency, will they send a report out to the public to understand what happened within their organization?
I don't know. All these agencies are required to do what's called after-action reports. They take like a year. It's really quick in government. But I thought they were all public documents. I don't think they are. I don't know. We got to read one on the Thomas Fire.
Ventura County,
Very
Thomas Fire.
interesting document. I'm thinking, wow, I can't wait to see these from all this. And then they're like, oh yeah, well, who was it that said they wouldn't release it? Was it LA Sheriff or someone? Wow. Somebody said they weren't going to release it, and we're like, what?
Well, there's a Henry Stern option that would get that out.
Yeah. What about Freedom of Information Act? Can you request it?
Now it's on the list. That's why we're here. We're here to add things to the
Also,
list.
the Ventura County one didn't fault any of the firemen. They faulted the water. They did?
Yeah, you know, they had a lot of areas to upgrade. A lot of areas.
Well,
Okay,
Sheila
so
Kuehl, what's going on with Sheila Kuehl's study? Because she's county,
Right.
and can she get them to release it?
Can she pay for the fees or waive the fees?
Didn't Chief Osby say at one of the meetings that he was actually gonna look into every incident where they had the information where a fire engine was there and didn't go into it. I don't know, Gary did question whether they'll release that information, but I believe he said, did he not? Do you all remember that?
I don't remember that, and my assumption would be Chief Osby can speak for LA County Fire. I don't know if he can speak for any outside companies or CAL FIRE. Yeah, everybody who was told we're waiting for orders or something like that. I mean, the corresponding question would be, if you were a lifeguard and somebody was drowning, would you sit there and say, I'm waiting for orders?
Yeah, but
You know.
that's one of the things they want to say, is that nobody died and that they saved lives. My situation was, I was in the middle of the street. There were probably 4 or 5 different fire departments represented, and I begged any of them to come in on the property. A little while later, within half an hour or so, it's hard to judge, the post office went on fire, and there were probably 4 or 5 active fire engines that went in, and firemen, and they broke down the walls, and they went in and saved it. Now, I have a fire hydrant on the corner there at PCH. We also have that reservoir up above me. What is that reservoir? Right behind me, next to Dr. Marwin. I'm on Sterling Farms, in the corner of,
It's probably Dr. Marwin.
No, it's not. It's public. There's a reservoir up there, and I think they call it the Malibu Reservoir. There's stairs that go up there, and then I have a water main on the corner of my property, below Dr. Marwin's house, next to the nursery. I have a water main there that burst, and it's the only reason that my farm stand, that we were able to divert that water and stop the embers from coming, and then we stayed there all night. Let me say this, I stayed. I was wrong to have left. I left because, well, first of all, did you have water pressure the whole time?
Not on point 2, but in Malibu West.
No,
Yes,
point 2.
our tank is way up high on the hill, and it's big.
It also seems the lower communities close to PCH, I don't think you have to pump as much, because they said they
Ours
had
is
water.
pure water.
We ran out Malibu.
Ours is pure gravity.
I have a well, and I had my generator set up. The reason I left was for my generators, but for some reason, I wasn't able to get water pressure when I had my hoses ready. You don't know anything about that water reservoir up there. It seemed to me it should be, Dr. Marwin had a fire engine up there protecting his house. And I don't think so, I don't know, I was just floored. Okay, I just wanted to answer those questions for myself since it's been so long.
Thank you, Carrie. Thank you.
Well, yeah, this is Ryan. We had emergency preparedness task force in the 90s before it was popular, before the 93 fire. And that's where the dolphin decals came from. And a few years later, there was also a request from, I think it's Dr. Marwood's house, to have a helipad in the city of Malibu. It's like, oh, great. Elevator, tennis court, pool, now you have a helipad to rate within the real estate community. So he got it. There's a condition on the approval for the helipad from this city, and that is that helipad can be used in case of emergency. So everybody on the council and in this room should know it's there. It should be utilized. I don't even know if the county or CAL FIRE was aware of that agreement. It's one of the stipulations.
And so there's a helipad next to Dr. Marwin's house?
On his property, correct.
It's behind me.
And I've been under that house, and we had a tour of it for the approval. And it was a very unusual agreement, and the city wrote an ordinance that says the spacing of helipads has to be something like every 5 miles. So the one that's here at the Civic Center behind the sheriff's station and his, and if you plot, it is like there really can't be any more in Malibu. But that was a way to nip this feature in the bud, but it is there and it's a resource. And the house also has a whole bunch of mechanical systems underneath it. It's kind of like its own fortress. So
yeah.
That's just the one thing. But I will say about the decals, that program was routinely reviewed by the partner agencies, not just the sheriff's department. Those decals came out of our group, and it was the mayor's wife, Emily Harlow, who did that. You didn't get a decal unless you could prove it to her that you had, property, or it wasn't just a car registration thing. And so so those were honored, and they were segmented by east, west, and central, if you look on your stickers, as to general areas, because we're so long of a city. But there's a lot of things, and we can talk about similarities to the '93 fire, and I wanted to say this quickly, is in 1993, we had city manager David Carmody, and I spoke at the Woolsey session that Sheila Kuehl had last time about that. It was a totally different mindset. David Carmody lived in Agoura Hills, so he knew that area. Our current city manager lives in Agoura Hills as well. Interesting parallel. David, I said, well, you live in Agoura Hills. What if we were talking earthquake generally back then. It's like, what if you need to get to Malibu? How are you going to get here and do your thing? And he said, I'll get there. I'll drive there. I will either ride a horse, or I'll get a police escort, or I'll take a helicopter, or I will walk. I will get there. And he did. He was here during the '93 fire. He slept in his office.
Was he on a horse? That's all I have.
Yes. I don't know exactly how he got it.
And he started his talk about the 8 things he did wrong, rather than we did everything right.
Yeah, well, that was another, yeah, then the follow-up meeting in, I think it was '95, that was a different thing, but there had been other events. There was a Northridge earthquake of just a few months after the '93 fire. The parallel to the '93 fire, and there was a lot of them, and Anthony, probably, Tony, I should say, would know this, is that there was the fire that started in Altadena and burned east to Pasadena Glen and over Eaton Canyon and took resources away initially. That was October 21st, I think. And then there was our fire on election day of November 2nd. And then it burned, same thing overnight. We got it on November 3rd. And then there was the fire in Laguna. And these were just boom, 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 and some of them overlapping. And getting the personnel and resources to these areas is a transportation problem, it's a personnel problem, and it's somewhat of a management problem for the mutual aid. And we got the short end of it in '93. And that was a massive effort for the time. We weren't quite as coordinated back then, but I think the LA County remained in control. And that's how the fire in '93 and '96 are a little different than this last one, and we'll probably hear in a year and a half that maybe the reason that guy's no longer in charge of CAL FIRE is that there was a lot of communication problems and didn't know maybe the best way to implement the system.
So Brian, you bring up some interesting points, and I just want to share something related to the dolphin stickers and the difference in the eras. What changed, part of what happened in Malibu, from what I've been told, and I'm not an expert on this, was 9/11 and Katrina. After 9/11 and Katrina, the federal government realized they got completely run over. They were unable to manage these events, so then they formed a new system of dealing with disasters, which we came under in this one, and it's called Unified Command. So Unified Command is trying to get a 30,000-foot view and get resources to a big area. The problem with it in this case is Unified Command cities don't have a seat at the table. We're not invited. So we can be there to hear information coming from those government agencies, but we don't get to participate. And in this event, that really, really hurt us because our geographical issues, they don't see it. They're up there in Sacramento with Unified Command and it's being run by CAL FIRE out of the state. That did not work out for us in this event, and I made them very aware that that's a fail. I asked Chief Osby directly, if local cities involved in this fire could have had a seat at the table at Unified Command, do you think it would have made a difference? And he said yes. So
I want to give a brief reflection on that, is that the city staff level in '93 and '96 was nothing like it is now. Our city still has complete control over all of its own employees and resources. Maybe not at the table, but we should have a representative in the room or at the command post.
They were at the command post in the media area.
Yes.
Because that's where they're allowed to be.
Whether the city manager could communicate with whoever was assigned there and so forth full-time, I don't know. There was a lot of breakdown in technical communications abilities in this fire that didn't occur in the prior fires.
Wow.
But damage assessment is the city's responsibility, and it's the first thing you do after a fire passes through. And my general observation is that wasn't done very well. is that the city had all of its resources. We had the volunteers on patrol, supposedly kind of have the resources of the sheriff's department in this regard. But we have all of the building and safety personnel who can go and make sure that the water and the gas and the electricity are turned off to a burned out house, for instance, and start to do their things. But you have to get the overall view, the damage assessment. You have to fly over, you have to have drones. You know, maybe the federal government can help us out with some instant surveillance of satellites, but you have to do that initially and quickly. And from what I've heard, that damage assessment was not done by the city for the reasons that the city needed to do it. Now the county and the fire department, they may have done their own damage assessment for their purposes. But internally, for the city, that wasn't done. How many houses burned?
You may be right, but my experience was they were out there as best they could be. But I can tell you, it was, as you know, any one of you's home burned down. It was devastating out there. I had trouble. I helped. I was the one who, you know, wrote down over 250 homes that burned. I couldn't find addresses on some of them. I was literally like turning over burnt pieces of wood. Oh, there's a 3. Okay, that might be this house. So I did see people out there. The other issue in this fire, I'm not defending, I'm just saying what I observed, was there was so much debris in the roads that getting around was incredibly difficult. And that took about 3 days for some of those roads to get cleared. And those crews were SCE and a few others, and some of us, I was helping clear roads, like I think Harvesters, we had chainsaws and that trying to clear it. Because for me, it was because there was animals that needed help and we had to get there as quick as we could. So, but to your point, could have been better? Oh yeah, heck yeah. Were people working hard? Yeah, they were, but we got to work smart, and we got completely run over.
So I want to say that one of the functions of the EOC is intelligence, and that's different than damage assessment, but it's one of the required duties. And like that one as well, if you don't know the current conditions of a neighborhood, not just ones that have burned out, but whether they're clear or passable and other constraints, that needs to be kept at the city level. And you have to know the information. If you know it too late, it's not really relevant anymore. So knowing it right up front throughout the whole event and keeping records of it throughout time, having, you know, like a stenographer person assigned, somebody always answering the phone, somebody always keeping track of all the data, that's what's important. And I don't think you can do that from afar. It needs to be done here in the city.
I just wanted to say, regarding previously what we were talking about with the fire, and I know we want to move on to better things, but in my observation, as I stayed the whole time as well, was first of all, when Chief Osby spoke and he acted very surprised at that meeting, which was like a month later, that there were people that didn't help, the firemen that didn't help. I thought that was really disingenuous. He had to know by then, because I'm sure that we were all complaining about it. He's like, really, really? And we know at Station 71, LA County, people went there, told them about crossing to Point Doom, and they said a lot of houses are gonna burn today. So it wasn't just the LA County that would help. I couldn't get anybody to help for a very long time. And I'm just wondering, I really am wondering if the new directive, which they're not going to say, is that we had a fire, it was with Lupe and Neil, like a few months before, and they responded amazingly. And I think if there is a, you know, an individual house, although yours was in this situation, or something on fire, they will be there for us. But when there's a huge, huge disaster fire happening like this, I don't know this, but perhaps they are saying, do not put yourselves in danger, do not risk any assets. Because the few fire people I did see was on Morning View protecting the high school, which was under construction. And then when the post office went, that is another city, you know, those things they are supposed to protect. And I don't know, I just don't know if that is a new thing, because as I mentioned, a previous fire.
It certainly appeared. It certainly appeared from looking on the outside, it appeared that all the resources were used to protect Pepperdine and downtown Malibu, and that's it. The rest of you were on your own and with no water. So that's what it looked like, looking from the outside.
Yeah, and we don't know that, so I don't know if we'll ever know that, but that's the reason. It's not unusual though, anybody who's lived in Malibu forever knows that the fire department rarely shows up and you do run out of water. That's happened for 60 years, forever. And so I think people will leave, all of my neighbors will definitely, they all left and they will still leave. They're new people, they're very wealthy, they're not gonna be anywhere near a fire. For those of us who are more, my husband grew up here, they may stay, and but once again, if we know that, those of you who go to a place, for us, it's a no-brainer. You go to Zuma Beach if you're afraid and it's dangerous for you. You have to know that. You go there, you wait till the fire passes, the huge firestorm. We didn't do that, and it was pretty gnarly. And you should go there, and then you come back, so you can put out those spot fires that will burn your house down. And believe me, they did all over my neighborhood, and I tried to save as many as I could, but gates were locked. And also addresses, even in the best of days when nobody's burned, I help my daughter deliver flowers. There's no addresses on so many houses. I'm like, come on guys, for a fire or anything, you need your address. So make sure that's very clear. The other thing, and I know this is a really good wave system that you talked about, but we have it can be done really inexpensively, and I don't know if that's what saved our house, but I'd say that really helped. We have sprinklers on our roof, just regular sprinklers on our roof. We have sprinklers everywhere, and we basically created this ecosystem of a lake. We had water everywhere until we ran out, obviously. But it really, really helped. We had it during the main firestorm, so that really, really helped us.
And you have on-site water tanks?
No, but I think that's a great idea. I'm on Phillip in Malibu Park. Okay. And so I think it's a great idea if we could. What's a great idea? The tanks. We would like to have a tank. I know David Niebergall, a dentist, he had one. Unfortunately, his neighbor's garage exploded and took down his water tank. But it exploded 5,000 gallons onto his house, which he credits with saving because he had to leave because it got so bad up there, and then they came back. But come back right away. So many people said, oh, we came back at 3:30 or 4 or something. You have to come back as soon as that firestorm. You're not endangered then. I mean, I didn't feel in danger at all after the initial craziness passed. But then you can do that. But I really would like to know, I don't know how we know of the new policy of the fire department, that in a huge thing like this, it's like we can't do anything. I've heard so many people, like I said, what's the plan? And they said, we have no plan, and so I know I'm taking too much time.
No, you're fine. I want to answer just a couple things quickly. So I think the problem the fire department has with rooftop sprinklers, which by the way helped me save a couple houses too, is that if everyone turns them on, your water pressure, nobody wins. So that's why I'm in favor of on-site water.
Yeah.
It's exactly where that comes from.
Right.
And as far as another issue Osby says he dealt with, and they have logs on this, and we'll see them eventually, is the amount of people that call 911. And their first mission, as they said, is saving lives. So I think a lot of people from out of town were calling 911 going, I don't know if my mother got out, etc. That was 900 calls. So that's another problem. So,
is that 900 is Malibu, Mikey, or?
No idea.
But I never saw a fire engine answering a 911 call. There were no fire engines.
Right, there wasn't anybody.
You didn't have a phone to call on. So.
Right. Just checking. Anyone hasn't spoken yet? Because we got some real, we're all chatty here. I can talk all day.
I'll beat you.
Anyone here that hasn't spoken yet? Or okay, I'll start bringing the mic over. You don't need the mic.
I just want to add one thing while we're talking about the fire department. I can tell you, because I've been involved at the state level over the last couple months, the state level, they don't know what to do. They don't know what the problem is, and they don't know what to do. Secondly, on the Woolsey fire, there was some kind of cost constraint on resources in the Woolsey fire. I'm seeing it on the financial documents that are part of the initial action plan. And there's a rumor that I haven't tracked down yet that 2 strike teams were taken out of service just before the fire crossed the 101 freeway. Yeah, that's the number one, and that's a big deal. And there's a couple other issues that have to do with Bell Canyon, but the other issue is that in talking firsthand with people that were in charge of dozers for cutting containment lines, they claim they were stopped from cutting dozer lines in the Malibu State Park by state parks because they did not want them cutting dozer lines. Somebody has to find out, and the person said they reinforced it with a Glock.
What?
Yep. And so that, the policy of state parks needs to be tracked down exactly in writing what the policy is relative to cutting containment lines, because there is an easy containment line at Mulholland Highway with low intensity fire, et cetera, all along there. There was no reason for it to cross there. There was no reason for it to cross at 101, but due to the lack of resources. So those two issues, what the policy is for LA County, and I have to tell you that Suzanne Good, who sits on our environmental review board, is one of the biggest advocates of doing nothing in the wildland.
Except in the lagoon.
And well, that's another issue.
I agree. The only thing I'll say on the fire lines on this fire, and I think some of the bigger fires burning in the west the last 5 years, is I witnessed this fire going 500 yards at a time right by me as it came on.
I'm in agreement with all
but
of that.
anything that slows it down would be incredibly helpful.
I think to answer Carla's question, I don't have the complete answer to be sure about the firemen. We're all wondering why the various engines didn't go up. But when I started meeting with people at the fire department, one of my first questions and one of my impressions was that they had become too bureaucratic. For example, when you go into battle, the Army or whatever gives the lieutenant in the field a lot of authority to react to what they're seeing right then. Well, to my surprise, what I learned is that's in fact how it is with the fire department. The commanders of each fire engine actually have a lot of discretion as to what they do and don't they do. They do not have to go anywhere where they think they're not going to come out alive. That makes sense. The other thing I learned is that it takes, each of the fire engines cost, or the standard fire engines they use cost around $350,000 and going up. And you do not get to be a company officer, that means the captain of a fire engine, until you have generally between 7 and 15 years experience. Because they view that experience, we've got the training, we'll have this issue in our volunteer corps as well. It's one thing to get the training, it's another thing to actually have gone through a fire. And so each fire is different. So they're not even allowed to take the test to become a company officer for at least 5 years. So while it wasn't said, I think, first of all, not going somewhere because you don't think you're going to bring your men out alive, fair enough. But while it also wasn't said, it would seem to make sense to me that if you've gone through all that experience and training and you finally become a captain of a fire engine, if you go into a fire and you lose an engine, it's like a captain who loses a ship. It's not a good mark on your record. So I can't give you the ultimate answer why. I think the ultimate question is whether the fire department's going to release its report, as you said.
That doesn't match no orders. They should have been
That's right, it doesn't match no orders. So how many of them were saying that? Yeah, so how many, we don't know how that mixes, but we do know that the strategy that they use, they do in fact delegate. They have to. They've got to let the guys on the ground. So
they didn't want to say, I can't go and lose my life?
I think you were guessing at that point.
But there are plenty of places like my house is not dangerous at all.
Right. So I think, I do hope the fire department does do it. I think they said they would, which is examine each incident where they can identify the fire.
And then Lloyd.
One comment relating to Malibu's relationship with Pepperdine. I hope that's on your list. As some people don't know, Pepperdine is not in the city of Malibu. They carved themselves out of the city. And so the Malibu boundary is right at the Coast Highway. They are part of the county. And I've done an article on this. I believe they did it because they felt that dealing with the county, they could manipulate the county better than they could manipulate the city of Malibu. Also, another point, the local did an article, and they talked to some people in the fire department without attribution, anonymously, and they said when they finally found out that Pepperdine, they sheltered in place a lot of their students. What they did is, at that point, there were 5 battalions of firemen that on Friday night protecting Malibu, protecting Pepperdine, and if not protecting Point Doom and the rest. They were there because the students were there. And there even is a small fire department that is part of Pepperdine. So I hope you have on your list protection and relationship with Pepperdine, improving it, because there are a lot of homes that burned on Point Doom and other places because they were protecting the students at Pepperdine. And after that first night, I think they said, okay, we're gonna stay here, we're gonna make the line of protection Malibu Canyon Road, we don't want the Civic Center area to burn. So that was their second level of importance once they got rid of Pepperdine.
They want East Malibu to burn too.
Right.
That was a big part of it. And you can see it if you drive up Malibu Canyon. I mountain biked it all. You can see that they fought it every time across the road, and they had a lot of resources there. Because they didn't want to lose East Malibu.
Why?
Yeah, why?
Because they liked them better than us.
Because it would have gone right straight into Topanga and then to the Palisades, and they had enough problems as it was, so they stopped it. The thing I want to remind you guys of, which reminded me of something this gentleman said. You were at the King Gillette Ranch, both of you, for Sheila's deal, and there was a gentleman that got up, was from Topanga, from that Las Virgenes Homeowners Association, and didn't want to water 29. And he used the term, to get any more water tanks in the Virgin area, which was a code word. We really don't want any water because we're scared of development. And these people are very dangerous because, Hans put something in his paper. There's a new group, Firefighters to Save the Ecology, or some double-ended double talk. So we gotta be all aware of there's people that aren't really interested in our best interest, fighting what we're fighting, which is, and as Chief Osby said at City Council chambers, water is a fireman's best friend. We need more water all the time. We gotta be obsessed by that.
Can I ask, why isn't Point Magoo being used?
The best I heard on Point Magoo, why they use those resources was, once again, communication and budgets and all state stuff. I don't have a better answer.
But I think that's a huge resource that we should.
It's been brought up to them.
Plus that one.
Ad infinitum.
What's going on? Yeah.
Okay, you guys are all under arrest now because.
VOPs are here.
What's going on? Also, I want to say for anybody that's worried about staying, I left and then I was able to sneak back in because I needed gasoline for my generators, because I have an organic produce distribution as well, and I needed to keep the coolers going. It was incredible what everybody did here. I mean, you could have eaten for days. There was gasoline. I was so stupid to leave. I felt so alone. I went back, but I should have stayed because there was gasoline, there were diapers, there was food. There was an incredible group of men and women that were here. So I'm sorry to blow, the standard evacuate. I believe in the supremacy of each person's intuition. If you know that you can handle it on your property, I say stay, because that's the only reason I saved my farm stand. We used my tractor and we put out embers, and there were resources here. They tried to stop us, but they couldn't.
And I think the community should be leveraged that way.
Yeah, they should.
Not pretend we're gonna be
Right.
there.
Well,
So let's face it.
that's why we're trying to find out what everyone's gonna do so we can make our plans when they don't show up. And one of the plans, I know one of my favorite plans, and I'm really serious about this, is our amazing VOPs, because we need help everywhere we can get it. So anytime we get help with evacuations or any sort of issues, God bless it, I mean.
What's VOP?
Yeah, what's
They're
Volunteers on
patrol.
patrol. That's these gentlemen are? They're all volunteers.
I applaud all that.
No, our VOPs, they now have to, we got the third car, is it in service yet?
Not in services, right out there.
They have 3 cars, and they go and they relieve the regular sheriffs after they do their initial contact in a lot of areas, and they They've written a lot of tickets to people that have been, not motor vehicle tickets, but parking tickets. And they come and help out and release the sheriffs to get back out and do what they do. But certainly in our plan going forward, we hope, well, they've been recruiting and they got, you know, a great crew. I think we'd love to all see that force grow. They're awesome humans. They do great things and we really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
We can rehash what happened and what didn't happen for the next 20 years. What we need now is to be able to rebuild our houses. And I think that's pretty much why we're all here. We've lost what we've lost. We can wake up at night like I do and think about what I'll never see again. That's gone. It's all done. What the mistakes that were made, the people that stayed, whatever. We need to get our homes back, and we need to get them back fast, because somebody here said the pain doesn't go away until we start to see our houses being built again. You have no idea the pain that we're all in. We're living in Oxnard. I mean, this is ridiculous. So please, let's forget about what happened and just get something done so we can get our houses built. I know he wants to say something.
And that's really is my everyday focus. It really is trying to, that's why it's so important we know what you're experiencing that's a problem so we can at least attempt to deal with it. So thank you for that, and I agree with you 100%.
And it's true. I don't know how you're doing it. I have no idea.
So this meeting, as with many meetings that have occurred subsequent to the 9th of November, we're discussing individual components of this disaster. All of the various policy changes that have occurred statewide, countywide, citywide, they've compounded themselves through basically the inability to strategically associate each one of these changed policies to understand the impact of one policy on another. So for example, you can't put a water tank in now to get a building permit. You used to be able to do that, okay? For example, there's no overall strategic perspective now being observed. It's all being piecemealed into individual bureaucracies, all of whom have their own excuses and their own policies. They all follow policies. Yeah, I'm an architect. So as an architect, the first thing I look at is the overall concept, okay? Because you can't successfully design anything unless you understand the question. And the question here is, what is the overall strategic structure to deal with these as they become, before they become disasters? So from my observation, I think this particular situation was probably the worst managed situation in the history of the Malibu fires. And that's largely not the fault of an individual firefighter, it's the fault of a series of bureaucratic changes that were not coordinated. And that is a leadership issue, okay? So what we're dealing with now is, at best, we have incidental and anecdotal management of disaster, when in fact there should be an overall strategic position. And the city's going to have to take the lead in that, because all of these bureaucratic shifts have occurred outside of our ability to manage or control. So earlier in this particular meeting, I talked about a rebuilding czar. A way to rethink the idea of a rebuilding czar is that instead of each of us who choose to have to hire an expediter, the city should have a downtown expediter that's doing the work for us. Okay? So that's one. Okay?
Yes.
The other thing is we don't need a disaster advisor, we need a disaster concept designer.
Yeah.
So that we have an overall design that can then be implemented. The next piece of that puzzle is that we're giving up about 99% of our tax base to the County of Los Angeles. If you look back at Pamela
96.
Pardon?
96%.
96%. Okay, so it's not quite 99. So we get what? So we get 4% of our property taxes. Okay, we need to increase our share of the property taxes because we made a bad deal with the Local Agency Formation Commission to even get incorporated as a city, because we gave up pretty much all of our tax base. We should be spending taxes on stuff to protect Malibu first, okay? And we need to get that back. And the way we get that back is we get it back from the county, okay? And who's running the county for us? Sheila Kuehl, okay? Sheila Kuehl needs to start answering emails. She doesn't. Okay. Her staff also does not answer emails. Okay. And what we really need, and you guys are probably going to have to take the lead because you're the only people that are answering anything. Okay. And then, well, you too. Yes. If you can get one more city council person to join you, I would say Zuma J probably, because he's got the same problem the rest of us do. We need to get after strategic stuff. Now, just as an example, in 1996, when the winds began, the day before the winds began, a huge contingent of firefighting capacity staged at the chili cook-off site. Okay, all of the mutual help trucks were already there. All of the resource facilities were already there. All the backup vans containing extra fire hose were already there. See, the problem is a fire truck, when it leaves one site, goes to the next site, they left their hoses behind because they don't have time to roll up the hoses. They have to be supplied by a logistics system. All that was in place with military, literally military efficiency the day before the fire. I was sitting in Judge Mira's courtroom, and sitting next to me in the jury box was the commander of one of the fire stations. He heard the super scoopers fly over, and he said to the judge, "I'm leaving, Your Honor." And Judge Mira said, "I'm gonna hold you in contempt." And he said, "Fine, if you want your house to burn down, do that," right? We stepped, okay? He said to the court then and there, he said, "Those airplanes, because I just picked it up on my radio, they're fighting a fire in Calabasas. It's gonna be here in 2 hours." Now, what that raises is the next issue. And that is that we have ample history of what direction these fires go based on wind and based on fuel load, okay? This was fought anecdotally. It was not fought on the basis of understanding the strategic system of these fires. We have enough history to understand what these fires do, okay? We know where they're gonna go. I knew at 6 o'clock in the morning when it got across the 101, I knew it was gonna be here, but the wind direction was south by southwest. So I looked at where it was coming across Castro Peak, across the ridge, and it looked to me as if the fire was going to skip by us because of where we were located on Canaan. That was an accurate observation. That fire came back up our canyon when the onshore winds began after dark, okay? And that was because the fire on Point Doom had not been sufficiently suppressed, because it turned the fire around and it went back on itself. It went northerly, okay? So the whole point of what I'm trying to say here, and I talk too much, I know, but that is that in 2007, the day after Thanksgiving, when that fire started because of the campfire fools up at the top of Corral, I went up to the top by Don Henley's place, up on the top of Zumarez, and there was a fire captain up there who was from another city. He had a laptop. On his laptop was a complete map system and fire flow direction on his laptop. What had happened was all these mutual aid chiefs had gotten together and they had built a master plan of how to fight a fire. Now that fire cost 56 houses up in Corral. The 96 fire, because they were staged the day before, only cost 6 houses. Okay? This fire, there was the chance to have a strategic system in place before this fire, and that hasn't happened. That's what we need to work on. What happened, how it happened, is not as important as how to stop it from happening again.
Totally agree. And I think what you're saying is an important, different version of what I'm saying about how unified command did not work in this event at all. It just doesn't work for this kind of event, and we bore the brunt of that.
One more.
I wanted to speak to something that was Chris's idea at an Operation Recovery meeting several months ago. At some point, despite everything, we will all be building homes. Most of those structures will be in the west. PCH will be outrageously impacted. Anyone who lives in the area, the number of cement trips it will take to do one foundation times 600, even if no one's in the same phase and it takes a year and a half. The amount of lumber delivered, the number of nails and hinges, it's outrageous. It's been proposed that Malibu turn some of the land over that the city bought on a temporary basis, meaning for a year or two, and that there be a quartermaster, maybe a private hire, who will coordinate with everyone who's building, and so that materials can be delivered in the middle of the night to a depot, so that cement trucks can maybe even mix cement in a certain place,
And ultimately, it will save the environment, it will save traffic, it will save the quality of life for the people who are living here. And it will speed things up. So, but it's a huge bureaucratic thing that has to be structured. It would be unprecedented. There are some very, very good minds that could put this together.
I don't think it's that difficult, and certainly the city and everyone knows that came up even before Chris. It's just a no. It seems so obvious. We have the land at Heathercliff, right in the middle of where everyone's going to rebuild. So yeah, thanks for bringing it back up. But yeah, that's definitely on the list. And you're right. It's going to be a huge issue.
I mean, right now with the debris removal trucks and with the serve pros, people are going crazy.
May I make one suggestion? The fellow farmers in the Thomas Fire said that the success of the Thomas Fire was that the fire department there had seen what happened in Sonoma, and they had a plan in place. And when these fellow farmers came out and stayed on their farms, there were fire trucks in every neighborhood, every corner, who had their assignments, that knew where they were going to go in case of a fire, and it was executed flawlessly. And if you look at the fire up in Ojai, and Ojai, as we know, is trapped. And there are so many properties that survived because of that. And that's something to look at, what they did and how they did it. When you said about the Thomas Fire, I was hopeful that maybe we could get that report.
Of course, there's all streets that are completely devastated, so.
No, but I'm saying,
I mean, there's like more homes, I think there are 800 homes.
I gotta go, I just wanna say thank you guys.
yeah, thank you.
Thank you for coming. Thank you.
And please, everyone, feel free to email us details, bullet points. It's always very helpful as we finish up today. The written word, as a business coach, we were talking about this a bit. You have a plan, you have dates, all of that, but also written. It really helps. Talking about it's great and very vital, but the written word gets into the detail that's helpful too.
I'm Susie Duff from Corral Canyon. Since you mentioned it, I was the fireman staged at my home 12 years ago for a week. All of Malibu looks like Corral did 12 years ago. And my heart goes out to everyone whose homes are going to heaven, wherever they went. I'm here because I made a pledge to 19 of my neighbors on my street and the adjacent street whose homes burned to the ground. That I would do my best to show up and speak for them. And so I know Karen and Mikey, I've spoken with you privately about what I'm going to say. I just want to get it on there because I've gone to every meeting, and only because it's you two would I give up Patty's Day to come where I was to do this. Again, it's a miracle I'm alive. It's 5 different battalion chiefs told me my home was gone. And 10 trucks, 3 on Corral Canyon, and for those of you who've heard me say this before, I beg your pardon, 7 more at the bottom of Corral sat there while I begged them, as close as I am to this beautiful young lady. You have 4 guys in that truck, you have hoses, you have water. Will you please go help my neighbors? This was during the daylight. Actually, it was 4 hours. And I was saying, are you concerned it's a box canyon? You don't know where, I'll show you. And they sat for 3.5 to 4 hours that I was there. And I just want to get this on record in this setting. I know I've spoken with you both privately. Because of 2012, 12 years ago in 2007, when 53 homes burned to the ground in Corral, we became the apotheosis of best practices. 40 men applied. I don't mean to be sexist. It's very difficult to carry these hoses over the things you have to climb over to qualify to be what's called call firemen, on call. 7 made it. 7 trained every weekend for a month 11 years ago to be call firemen. They kept that certification up for the last 10 years. We bought them a fire truck. The county took our truck. They wouldn't let those guys fight the fires as these homes burned to the ground. Every failure you can think of happened, and so for those who say, help us build our homes, talking about what happened isn't going to help. I see it differently. I want to do it both. I think it's not either or. I think it's yes and. Yes and let's help you get your homes built, and let's figure out a better way to do this, because every best practice that anyone could put into place was in place in Corral and had been for a decade, and it failed. And 19 homes again on my street and the adjacent street burned to the ground. So, you know, Karen, I've known you for almost 40 years. I'm in, you know, 38 years here. Mikey, I'm just getting to know you. You know, Karen, I know your integrity. Mikey, I'm hearing so much great stuff about you, and you've been very kind to me. I have great doubts as to why I'm even here, you know, what this could do, because I think the feds have to come in. I don't understand how the city can, you know, snitch on itself, how the county can snitch on, you know what I mean? It's like the fox guard, the chicken coop, and maybe you explained all this before, and I was, you know, praying for everyone with my Patty's Day friends. So I say all that to say this. Thank you for hearing this again. Those of you who've had to hear it, I'm here to testify on behalf of my friends who cannot even get in here because they think they're going to tear somebody apart. And the rage is only increasingly growing as all the snags are happening. It's a horror show. So, bless you and thank you.
Well, thank you. And the reason that's so important is because we are attempting, we are the people going to those agencies. We are going to Sacramento. That trip's planned for April 9th, as long as we can meet with everyone, including Gavin Newsom, head of Cal OES, everybody. That's why we're going. But, and you know, Thursday we were with Chief Osby, we were with Villanueva, we were with all the talking heads. And so that is our job, to influence them, and I'm very direct with them, as you can imagine, but I'm also good at creating relationships. So I'm trying to do both. Like you said, I'm trying to fight the fire on both fronts. I want to create those relationships and honor them. I'll do the work, and I'll deliver the message that needs to be delivered. I know you guys are delivering it too, but it's a group effort, and Karen and I, because you guys voted for us foolishly, we get a little better access, and I'm still learning it. We're still learning how to use it, but we're getting the hang of it, and that's our job, and that's what we're committed to doing. So it really makes a difference, so thank you.
One thing to that point, though, some individual made that decision to take that piece of apparatus off the hill.
Yep.
And unfortunately, I think those individuals need to be identified.
Yeah.
And driven out of the system.
Right.
Or their attitudes or something change.
Yeah.
Because individuals make these decisions,
exactly.
not bureaucracy.
And I think they know who did it, but I don't know the name.
And
well,
to that end, just so that you know, I have spent, it's like a part-time job. Not speaking with Chief, thank you God, what a great problem for me to have, given my neighbors. Not Chief Osby, but the number 2 chief, David Richardson, and the number 3 chief, who was in charge of Malibu, Anthony Whittle, who's now been transferred.
Right.
You know, to the easternmost region.
That's
okay.
one of the things.
Both of them, I've had very, very long, many times difficult conversations with them, not limited to and including Anthony Whittle, who was in charge of Malibu. When I first spoke with him, said to me, his opening words to me were, "This is the greatest fire department in the world." And I said, well, this is going to go well. That's how we began it. And so I've had many conversations to find out exactly I've had many conversations to find out who was making that decision. And as David Richardson, the number 2 chief, said to me, "Susie, what are you going to do with this information when you figure it out?" I said, "I guess that's for me to know since you're my employee." And I don't know, but someone knows. Someone knows. Go find out. And, you know, and stop hiding and not showing up at these meetings, I said to him, and sending out Chief Anthony Williams, who's like the number 4 chief, who's at Fire Station 70. Anthony Williams was the chief during the 2007 fire in Corral Canyon 12 years ago. He knows every single territory of that place. And he said when he saw our fire truck leaving, he almost sank to his knees at the bottom of Corral. And he's trying to also find out about this. There's a game going on here that, in my view, is deadly. And the final jeopardy point I just do want to make is what's tearing me up is hearing people say, "I will never leave, I will never leave." Because what I'm terrified of the next time, and there will be one, we know that, is we're not talking about homes, it's bodies, okay? Because, hey, I'm a good doobie, I leave, you know, it's like goodbye, but I didn't this time because I couldn't get out. So this stuff is as serious as it gets. And it did not have to happen. It did not have to happen. And we have to rethink the whole darn shoot and match here, if you ask me, but you didn't, but I'm telling you.
Let me say one thing, that most people in these fires, and this is happening all over the globe, most people die in evacuation. They don't die in their house. The elderly that can't get out of their house, they may die in their house. But most people die in evacuations, and that's because the evacuation routes, the escape routes are not safe.
Correct, that's right.
And gridlock.
And gridlock. I mean, that's usually what happens. You have smoke comes across the road, you have a car stop, another car runs into it, now you have a roadblock.
Paradise.
Yes.
You have Oakland Hills.
And you have Paradise,
Oakland Hills.
Oakland Hills.
It happened in Greece just, I think, last year. Yeah, Australia about 5 or 6 years ago.
And Australia changed a lot of the way they fight those fires now, completely. So that event changed a lot for them.
Yeah.
Including their building codes.
Ryan?
Yeah, I had one I
Sorry,
wanted
I'm
to
trying to rush
read.
you.
The incident command structure is maybe the precursor to what we now call the new command, or whatever. But the words in almost every agency's emergency protocol are very similar, and I'll just read the one paragraph because this is actually from the City of Malibu's municipal code. This is the duties of the city manager. So these are not really optional. And it's 2.52.060, powers and duties of the director and assistant director of emergency services, which in our city is a city manager and assistant city manager unless they designate somebody else. So section 6B says to obtain vital supplies, equipment, and other properties found lacking and needed for the protection of life and property, and to bind the city for the fair market value thereof. I get to thinking about these supplies that were coming in by boat, that were needed. And if required, to commandeer the same for public use. Wow. So, and the city manager doesn't take a day off because somebody else is at the top of the command. We still have to take care of the city.
Right. Yeah.
And then further, the next item C says basically everybody comes to work, or everybody's work from home, whatever. If you work for the city, you're at work. To require emergency services of any city officer or employee, and to, in the event of the proclamation of a state of emergency in the county in which the city is located, blah, 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 is to command the aid of as many citizens of the community as, says he, deems necessary in the execution of his or her duties. Such persons shall be entitled to all privileges, benefits, and immunities as are provided by state law for registered disaster service workers. To requisition necessary personnel or material of any city department or agency. So this is, we're going full bore on how to deal with the problem. This prescribes how to do it. It's in the municipal code, but I printed this today from the city's website. And I don't think a lot of this was done. I don't think that the idea that you're gonna need to bring in maybe water for neighborhoods that ran out just to drink. You know, these things need to be on the mind of our administration because we're gonna be, all of our pocket neighborhoods, somebody's gonna run out of water. You're gonna need to bring in water. That's the most simple thing. You see it in every country and every disaster. It's the first thing that comes in. Comes in by airplane, by boat, they drop it from helicopters, whatever they need to do to bring in the supplies. We got that wrong here, and it was a requirement. So the idea of commandeering supplies from the local hardware store and writing them an IOU or something, that's protocol, they know it. And if it's a helipad on somebody's private property, we already have that agreement, you use it. You have to keep track and inventory all this and maybe practice, go by the plan, maybe you have read the plan, so that you know what it is. It's not the state's prescribed plan. We call that the doorstop in our group. It was in a big red binder, and I read it once, but I edited it. I said, there are still some places that say, insert name of the city here. So, this is what we're dealing with, but we have to know what is expected of the leadership and what their powers are, because they're wide-ranging, and what the duties are, and it's a 1, 2, 3, go. And so here's my legal question about that fire truck, is I guess it was fair game to be commandeered.
It's arguable.
But it had to be used for a purpose.
It's arguable.
Yes.
It's arguable.
If not just give it to me and we're gonna put it in the back of the parking lot, in case we need it. It needs to be implemented and used, otherwise I'm not so sure it was eligible to be commandeered, because it was meant to be staged in the community that it was to be used.
It's arguable.
Yes.
Because of, Chief Anthony Williams was great, who helped us get it. It's tied to LA County, so it's arguable as to whether or not they had the right to commandeer it.
So I talked to some of the,
Nice.
he told me that if them commandeering it was allowed, but that was his opinion. I don't know, I'm not a lawyer. The one thing I want to say, Ryan, is some great points there, some great points. It brings up something that's interesting to me. From what Karen and I have seen, the city's staff, I just wanted to say, worked nonstop, tirelessly, massive commutes, because our EOC was in Santa Monica and a lot of them lived the other way. So,
And the 101 was closed.
well, they don't live in Malibu.
You can't expect it, right?
Why did they leave? They were evacuated. So, I don't have an answer.
This building was evacuated.
Yeah. Why were they gone?
No, I'm
Right.
saying.
That I can't answer, other than they said it was filled with ash, and I don't know. I wasn't here. Well, I wasn't here. I wasn't here. So as far as the rest, great points. And that's all I know on that. So we're at about 3 hours here. Do we have any last comments?
And may I just say one thing? If there's anyone who hasn't spoken and would like to, I don't want you to go home thinking, I wish I'd said something. So just remember, open mic. Okay, sorry, go ahead.
Just one more comment. A couple years ago, we were in Italy on Amalfi Coast. There was a fire. We were watching from the house we were renting. It was a tiny little village, much smaller than Malibu. They had about 10 water scoopers. The winds were crazy, but they were going in and out, and they put out the fire. They did not lose one structure in that fire. And the coast is pretty much like Malibu. So
You're in Positano then?
it was actually Atrani. Very close though. My question is, since you mentioned that you are going to go to Sacramento, perhaps, right? So why doesn't California have these water scooping airplanes? Why do we have to rent them from Canada when we have these fires? This is not a first fire, this is not going to be last fire. Why doesn't California invest into water scooping planes?
Yep.
Please,
Yeah.
forward the question out
advised
there.
against it.
Why?
In
They prefer
2013, because it was too much money. He advised, it was brought up at the supervisors that we needed
Fire
more
Hawks.
super
He's got new Fire Hawks on the
And
way.
he advised against it, and they voted 3-2 not to get super scoopers.
I just have one last question. Are we even considering the plan that Don Schmidt submitted to City Council with regard to the oversized?
The sprinkler system or the tanks?
The sprinkler system and the tanks. The sprinkler system first, because it would stop any fire from crossing the ridge line to coming into Malibu, period. So I want to know, is that moving forward? Are we getting any traction for it? How do we move that forward? Because that's been the best idea that's been presented, and nobody else has presented a plan even close to that. I heard someone say they wanted to do some testing on it, but we know that fire is coming again. And when it comes again, it would be nice if we use the already, there are already ridge lines that have separated Malibu from Calabasas and Agora and the other side of the hill. And we can stop a fire before it even comes into Malibu with that system. So I'm just, I know it was presented. I just want to know, is there any way to track whether it's getting any type of traction? Has it been presented? Has it been moved forward?
He's been trying to bring that forward for 10 years, and no state agency is biting. So
okay.
That's what I've heard. And I know there were some state people that were at that meeting, and they were like, it's not happening.
Okay,
There's
so that
too
takes
many
me-
agencies it crosses, I think, for anyone to even want to attempt it. I can count at least 5 state agencies that have to approve it. And wow, you can't get one to make a decision, so I just, and then of course the environmental crowd will come in and there'll be lawsuits. But I don't think there's any, I think Don needs to figure out a way to bring that forward because he's got the passion. I don't know that in whatever bandwidth I have, that'll be my first thing. I love Don, I think it's a great idea. If it existed, turn it on, great. I just think the reality of it would be so many years off. And,
Okay, then that brings me back to on-site water tanks.
And I wonder about its effectiveness, I really do.
Okay, that brings me back to on-site water tanks.
But I don't know. I don't know, maybe it's the best idea. I don't know.
Okay, that brings me back to on-site water tanks. Water
Me
District
too.
29 has the power to undo that little rule they did in the middle of our construction. They have the power to undo that little rule and put it back into allowing us to put private water tanks on site.
Which makes just no sense that isn't already.
Exactly.
In my opinion.
Right.
Mikey, did someone say, I mean, you advocate water tanks in your property, did someone say that it would be hard to get a permit to put one on your property?
Yeah, coastal could get us in trouble.
You get into coastal.
Yeah, and my idea, if I took it forward with technology now, is it doesn't even have to be above ground. There's advantages above ground, but you could even do an alternative power source and put it half underground,
Half
partially
underground, right.
I don't, a 10,000 gallon tank doesn't take up that much space actually. So, but that's just what I think.
If I wanted to put one in my house now, I'd have to go get a permit.
You have to get a CDP,
Yeah.
which is a kind of a pain.
Yeah.
So I think we'd have to get it out of the CDP into an administrative approval. So CDP, if you get one in less than a year, it's like a miracle.
Yeah, so if you want to encourage people to do it, that's one thing is if you clear the administrative ability to get a permit.
As King of Malibu would be done.
I'm
I'm working on it, I'm working on it. I
We
don't
even
know-
get you a queen if you do that.
I nominate you.
I don't know, my wife is there, but I just carry along Karen for a moment. I don't
She's
know.
So sorry, I forgot to say one more last thing. This is to the thing about this is the worst fire and nobody's seen a fire like this and blah, 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 blah. My neighbor saved my home and 2 other homes with a garden hose, and we're in the Malibu Bowl. We're in one of the highest fire danger zones in the world. These fire scientists have explained to me, and they said I wouldn't have my family living in Corral Canyon in Malibu Bowl. Okay, so, and my neighbor, as some of you heard me say, who saved our homes with a garden hose, we had sprinklers, and he's in horrendous shape, okay? He had a back operation last year that I begged him not to have, so now his back is worse and his legs don't work. He's an electrician of 50 years. His wrists, he can hardly open a jar. His wrists are so shot. He had a tumor removed from his neck. He's in horrendous shape, and he saved 3 homes with a garden hose. To everyone saying, this is the hottest fire, we've never seen anything like this, and oh my God. 3 homes with a garden hose in the heart of the bowl, of the Malibu Bowl of Corral Canyon, okay? So to hear people say, what could we have done? What could we have done? 3 homes with a garden hose, okay? A guy who's in pretty bad shape. Can you imagine these buff firemen coming in with hoses and water? This is crazy. My final Jeopardy question point is a question. What about asking Gavin Newsom to come here and meet with us? When you guys go up there.
In April, yeah.
Yeah, you know what I mean? It's like,
Please come to Malibu.
yeah, you guys come, because
It's a great
I spoke,
idea.
you know, because I spoke with Henry Stern and it said, you know, I'm sorry, I think we have to have the feds in here, and Henry said an interesting thing to me. He said, the feds are they're too much of a blunt instrument. He said, you need the state at its highest levels. Well, you know, Mr. Newsom.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, so it's 3. I just want to wrap up with one last thought I had on a bunch of things here. So we're trying to get things done, and it's obvious we got to all get our political group together. But the interesting thing, and we're new on city council, that I find very interesting is with everything we're talking about here, Karen and I can't talk to a single other city council person about it.
Brown Act.
It's against the law. So just realize that we can't, like, I had this vision of like, well, I'll get the huddle, we'll talk about how to bring Malibu. Nope, can't do it.
Mikey, can you speak to that exactly about what the law is and how
They
it
can
works?
watch the tape.
So,
Can they
yes,
watch the
so
tape?
we are not.
But how does the Brown Act work in this regard?
Okay,
We
so this-
can't, oh, sorry. Oh,
this
or
is
Becky
a-
or Karen, I mean.
Yeah, either one.
Okay, we're not supposed to conduct business, city business,
In a non-agendized meeting.
in a non-agendized meeting. So, yeah. So in our business, we have to be able to count to three. 3 votes can pass a motion. We cannot. So any 2 council members or any 2 city commissioners can meet and talk about city business. It doesn't mean we can't all show up at the library speaker series in the same room at the same time or something like that. But we cannot conduct city business outside of the realm of the public. And so that creates a difficult situation for us. We can't just have a meetup with Skylar and Rick and Jefferson and say, hey, this is a great idea, let's do this, and we'll all just approve it at the next council meeting. That's against the law.
Right. So
Okay?
how can we help? What do we do?
So you
Come
can
to
talk
council
whoever you
meetings.
want also. You all can talk to whoever you want.
Yeah, you can email all 5 of us, you can call all 5 of us, you can meet up with us. We can't respond, like, when we get emails, we can't reply all.
Can they look at this tape?
They can, yes.
Those of you that email us, Gail, you see that I never reply with anyone else on it. Occasionally, Karen and I, we can reply together.
Because we're the co-chairs of
But then
this
the
committee.
problem becomes remembering who's the one person you can talk to. So it's like, wait, skate parks, we're talking, no, wait.
Yeah, sometimes we ask each other, have you talked to anybody else about this? And if the answer is yes, then it's like, okay, never mind.
Quick comment.
Right.
Wow.
Go to city council, public speaking, before the agendized items are spoken about, speak, whatever, all of this topic has been, speak and it goes on the record.
Right, and that's what we've been doing.
That's why I do that.
That's what we've been doing too.
Right.
You'll see that we do that, and then, but we can't make, that's why you can't make a decision on it there. It's not agendized yet. Doesn't mean we can't get it on an agenda.
You
but
each have the
that's
power to
just the
agendize one
process.
item.
Yes, and,
Right.
and so the point of this law is that the deliberations take place in transparency in the public view.
Yeah, sunshine.
And I have to think that through, especially now, thank you guys, new on the council. And I've even asked our city attorney and city manager about certain things. And the answer is, well, yeah, it may be awkward, but you're gonna have to have that discussion during a council meeting, you know, with anybody in the room and anybody watching from home or watching the tape later.
Once it's agendized, but maybe a final decision, can you then talk about?
Yeah, what about that?
Amongst each other, or no?
How do you mean?
No.
Well, once it's come up at a city council meeting, can you then talk?
No.
Not.
Part of it, no, we can't.
After it's done and settled, we can, but even there you have to be very careful because if it gets appealed or comes back, and then we've knocked ourselves out.
Well, put it this way, if we do that, then we need to recuse ourselves from the vote, and we don't want to do that.
If we email you, can we email you all 5 at the same time?
Yes.
So that each of you at least know that.
Absolutely. The
Everybody's
question,
got
can
the
you
same
email all 5 of us at the same time regarding the same
Yes,
thing?
you just can't
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You, the public, can do that.
I suggest you also
Maybe.
include the city
I don't know who
manager
else is
on
reading
all
our
your
email.
emails, so the city manager is aware of what you're asking of
Sure,
our
yeah,
voting
good idea.
party.
Email the city manager, CC, or email with us.
Always.
Even our legal counsel, you
Yeah,
can
because
CC
at
the
least
legal
that
counsel.
way you know that all of your other council members know the same set of facts.
Yes, exactly. And one thing about this committee, so we are called the Disaster Response and Recovery Ad Hoc Committee. And it's an important distinction that we're an ad hoc committee. We're not a subcommittee. We're not, you know, like the Public Safety Committee, which is different from the commission. By being an ad hoc committee, we have more nimbleness. We're not bound by law like the other committees and commissions with the legal notice required of our meetings. We do notify them and publicize them because we want as many people as possible to come or to watch the tape. But City Council, Planning Commission, all of our subcommittees, they're required by law to give 72 hours notice. The city usually does more than that. In most cases, you'll have a 10-day notice. And if there are changes to an agenda, those have got to be put on before the 72-hour cutoff. This committee is, we're more nimble since we're an ad hoc committee. And we were specifically organized that way to give us more latitude.
I have a quick question. There are a lot of really good things brought up by the public during the city council meetings, and nothing ever seems to get agendized. How do we get things agendized? If there's no wonderful things are brought up, and then you see the agenda for the next meeting, and you're doing the poet laureate or leaf blowers or something, and that's not why we're there.
So here's the other challenge, and particularly now more than ever, because of the Woolsey fire disaster, catastrophe, is that a lot of items that get brought up, since we're policy people, the staff has to implement, they have to do a report and research it. And their bandwidth right now is super overwhelmed. So there's a bunch of things Karen and I, like we have these wonderful platforms that are amazing and would change everyone's lives. We haven't even like brought them up because literally everyone, our focus, the city's focus, trying, despite how slow and painful it is trying to get people back in their homes. So there's not a ton of bandwidth. I mean, you got anyone that's elevated the city is dealing with outside government agencies on this disaster, trying to get money, trying to do all the things, a lot of things we are talking about. So it's an interesting time. So there's a bunch of things I want to have agendized, and it's challenging, but at the same time, we got to keep pushing forward, and that's what we're doing. And of course, as the new kids, you know, who knows if we're getting a little punked along the way. I mean, I don't know what anyone else is bringing up. I didn't know that Rick was bringing up what's on the agenda for us to sign on that bill related to undergrounding that's going forward. I think it's Richard Bloom's bill. I think it's Bloom's. So great, but I didn't even know. That's awesome. So there's a bill going forward to California Senate on undergrounding. I didn't even know that, but somehow Rick knew, and he wants the city to be a signer on that. So
well, and I will say I've had the experience now of asking staff to study something that I could put it on an agenda going forward. And I got the initial report back, and there are unintended consequences of my idea that I didn't realize. Now I'm not so sure it's a good idea to bring this forward. So, you know, I hate to lose time like that, my own, your all's, the city's. We're trying, guys.
When you guys go to Sacramento, is it going to be all of the city council or just the two of you?
Just us, yeah.
Okay.
No, again, that'd be another Brown Act issue, yeah.
we'll have to bring all of you with us.
You're all welcome.
I think we all go to Amalfi and study the
road trip.
Yeah, Amalfi Coast is our next meeting, and we're
Exactly. No, you're doing double duty for us unincorporated areas who don't have a city. You guys are helping us out too.
Well, we're trying. Of course, anything we can do.
You know what? Because it's all connected.
Right.
You know, the fire doesn't know the line between the city and the county, or LA and Ventura County.
Hey guys, our business cards up here, our business of government cards are here. Our information's on the city website. We really, really appreciate you coming. You can call, you can email, you can text.
Thank you, Mikey.
Thank you, everyone.